Really, everyone, welcome to the Planning Board, clinic or DP clinic hosted by the Belgrade Planning Board. My name is Sarah Mariette, and I was the one that did the late invitation for everyone. So I'm so glad to see you over here. The, our planning board, since I've been in, always to get different opinions on what the state required and what our ordinances call for. And in particular parts of the ordinance, our own board have, there's no balance. We had to stretch out of how we view the driving in our interpretation. So ideas were kicked out within the board to possibly bring in DEP and answer some of our questions. And as that was a brainstorm, the concept of inviting our student neighbors in the watershed came about. So we ended up inviting the town of Oakland, Sydney, Mercer, Smithfield, Mount Vernon, and Rome. I'm glad you guys made it here in person. We have a lot of people, I guess, in the Zooming. I heard from different people that we're gonna do it through Zoom. So, I guess the general vision of this meeting, which I wish hopefully we'll do every year we can, is to bring all the citizens of the watershed together and be able to be more uniform in applying the guidance in the state. So with that, we have Colin Clark here, and I apologize that you asked for bio you.
That's okay.
Introduce you. But so with that, I'll leave the floor to Mr. Clark. Thank you.
Should I ask, do we need to figure out a way to put this on that so that people can see the screen?
That'd be great. You know, share screen. How to do this?
I know how to connect it from here to there. I got a cable, but the cable's short.
Okay,
So,
well,
Well,
let's just try to figure that out. What kind of cable are we talking about?
we're talking about HDMI cable.
but would
This is my emergency bag.
that show to everybody like this? Is,
So I only have one HDMI port and that's going into this.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, the other thing, we can have the owl focus there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, they don't need to see me.
how do you make the owl focus there?
That's gonna be interesting because the owl follows the voice. If we making deaf,
Yeah, so I think if you were to stand near the screen, it would.
it will follow you.
Follow
That's
you.
right.
Oh, it's gonna follow me?
If you're gonna get close to the screen, yeah,
Okay,
that's a good idea.
okay, then I can't see the screen though, so that's, all right. See how I can make this work then.
You want a separate table?
No, I'm good, thank you.
This.
Is it following me?
First.
As long as you talk, opposed to whoever's talking,
Oh, okay,
360.
well, all right, well,
Hold on, I messed this up.
okay.
You know how to make. the big screen?
Well, while he's figuring that out, yeah, Colin Clark, I am the state shoreline zoning coordinator. In the back, kinda hiding in the corner is our newest shoreline zoning person, Jessica Sayers. She is taking over in the Bangor office and we're really, really excited to have staff in all regions except for northern Maine, but we haven't had staff there in a long time, so that's what it is. I really appreciate you guys inviting me to talk. It's a great thing when municipalities want to get a little bit more information and want to have a discussion on shoreline zoning topics. One benefit that it's really weird seeing yourself on a TV screen over there. One big benefit that you folks have here is this gentleman right here. When I took over this job, For years, I still do it weekly. I constantly ask myself what Rich would do. And, you know, he, in my opinion, wrote the book on shoreline zoning, so if you guys have in-depth questions, I'm sure he still has forgotten more about shoreline zoning than I will probably ever know. But yeah, well, I will say,
Now we
when
have the blame.
when I moved, my wife and I had a place in Augusta. And when we had kids, we moved back to Gardner area and in West Gardner. And as soon as I moved into town, a bunch of people that I know had said, oh yeah, you oughta, you know, get on the planning board or get on the select board or the appeals board. I'm like, no. Not happening. This is West Gardner. This is not, no, one wrong move by me and all of a sudden I got a dump truck of chicken poo in my driveway. So I'm not all about that, but sure brought like a different situation.
Okay. Well, we've got 2 people online. They'll be able to hear you just fine.
Okay.
The graphics.
Well, I can absolutely, how about if, nope. How about if I give you the presentation on my flash drive and you plug it in yours and you share your screen with them?
You know more about it than I do. So.
I don't,
That should work.
that should work. I like your attitude. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. Alright.
If I get out of here. Eject, good. So I put the same presentation on my desktop, so. And this is a trusted source, I'm not gonna infect you or anything.
No, now we know, we got no for it.
Well, how about you get rid of your mouse and use the little touchpad?
Very glossy, too.
You know, so stop.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then somebody else is gonna have to. You'll have to load it up and do whatever. On that part.
Load it up.
Let me see if I can. Get this back to here.
So what is the name of your presentation?
Just go to that USB drive there,
Yeah.
and it's the top one.
Belgrade?
See, look it up.
Yep, the Belgrade PV. Yep. And you just gotta click along with me.
You know, bring in one real one.
You want to even listen.
Well,
I have it in mind, I can listen to it, and then. Technology. See.
no. Spinning wheel. It's a solid possibility. You're all set.
All right.
Sweet. And then down on the bottom of that screen. Right around in that area, there's a line with a box on top of it, a little bit. Oh. Over to the right.
We're good.
And I assume people on the other end can see that? Okay, all right, let's rock and roll. All right, so I got like 50 slides here. I'm gonna kind of cruise through some of them, get you a lot of information. And, you know, if along the way you got some questions, happy to answer them as best I can. If it comes up with a question that I don't know the answer to off the top of my head, I would rather not shoot from the hip and get you the wrong information. We can write them down, get your email address, you can go to Rich, you know, all that stuff. Maybe Jess knows, you know, somebody will know, but we'll get you the right information. And at the end of this thing, we can give everybody a copy of this presentation. I don't print out a bunch of stuff these days. Everybody ends up throwing that stuff away anyway, so you can have it electronically. And I got some cards and all that stuff, so we can get you my contact info. So a lot of this stuff is gonna be pretty basic. Most of you guys are gonna know all of this already, but shoreline zoning applicability, basically we deal with great ponds, streams, rivers, coastal wetlands, freshwater wetlands. There we go, okay. Each of these different resources has different setbacks potentially, based on what the resources are. You know, wetlands, great ponds, coastal wetlands, big rivers, all have the 250-foot shoreline zone, which you guys are well aware of. And then when you get into the smaller streams, you get a 75-foot setback on all of those. And that is actually the shoreline zone as well. So that can work. Inside of the shoreline zone, and this is something that people get tripped up on all the time, I'm sure. Nobody's getting tripped up on this in this room, but you have the shoreline zone, which is 250 feet from the normal high water mark or the upland edge of the wetland. That's the shoreline zone, 250. Inside of that 250, you have a buffer, and that buffer is what we're protecting because that's the part that insulates the resource from runoff. And that buffer is also establishes the setback. So on great ponds and rivers that flow to great ponds, you're setting back 100 feet if you're building a new house, a new building, a new whatever. On rivers, on other rivers and streams, 75 feet. Trib streams is 75 feet. When you get into general development 2, that can get reduced. General development 2, it's down to 75 feet. General development 1 is 25 feet. Those are for the industrial type areas. Probably don't have a lot of big general development areas here in Belgrade or in this area at all. But there's a lot of communities that do. The other setback item that's on the screen is for functionally water dependent items. So for things that require as an operational necessity to be that close to the water, such as down in your fishing communities, marinas, things of that sort, you don't have a setback at all for some of those items. Now, probably more of what you folks deal with here is the amendment process. When you guys are updating your shoreline zoning ordinance or your shoreline zoning map, there's a process that you go through. Each town does it a little bit differently. Some towns have the planning board write up the new ordinance or the amendments. Some towns have an ordinance committee. Some have an ordinance board. Some people just hire people to do that. With that all being said, anytime any of your communities, Belgrade and the neighboring towns that have come tonight, you don't necessarily need to hire somebody to write your ordinance. You can literally email me and within 5 minutes, I can get you a template. It's a glorified Mad Lib. For us that remember what Mad Libs are, my kids have no idea anymore. Where you literally fill in your name and a couple of dates, you make a couple of choices and you're good. You get it voted on, you get it attested, send it in, get it approved, just that fast. There's companies out there, not to, you know, besmirch them, but they're charging people $3,500 a year as part of a contract to keep your ordinances updated. Mine costs $0. Your taxes at work. And we've developed 9 or 10 of them, so we can immediately send one out to an inland community that doesn't have a significant river segment, that doesn't want to regulate a certain thing as RP, that doesn't want to regulate timber harvesting. We have that all done. Bang, gets emailed out to you, put your name on it, put a date on it, out the door. Now, there's obviously locally, when you're doing this stuff, you have a public meeting. You get that public input on some of these things. I'm sure there's a lot of lively debates from people that either don't want certain things in the ordinance or do want certain things in the ordinance. That's all part of the process. After that's done, or as part of that process, department staff can be a real benefit to you. Not only can we send you a template, but we can also assist in reviewing draft amendments, which is a real nice option for towns. That way you don't end up with an ordinance being presented on a warrant article, going to vote, and then sending it into the department, and then you get a conditional order or a denial. We don't do a lot of denials, we do a lot of conditional orders, but a lot of that stuff can be taken out of the mix by sending it in, 3 months before it even goes to town vote. And that way you don't end up with any of those issues. And we can discuss, the pros and cons of each option. One of the big hot topics for a number of years has been timber harvesting. A lot of the Maine Forest Service would love everybody to be option one. Meaning you completely defer to the Forest Service. They handle timber harvesting in every way. And which 9 times out of 10 is probably the best deal. A forest ranger walks onto a site, he looks at a cut. He or she can immediately know that's in violation or not. A code officer and myself went out and looked at one a few years ago, and we were out there for 3.5 hours. And then we came to the point to realize that there was a violation, whereas somebody that does it every day can look at something really quickly and make a call. So there's some options out. Oh, and we can also advise on any map amendments. Mapping, I will, little behind the scenes thing, something, Rich probably still had the benefit of it when he was at the department. And something I'm really frustrated about, to be honest with you, because I can send you a model ordinance in 5 minutes, but I can't send you a map. Our GIS staff it used to be 4 people for the DEP. Now it's down to essentially 1. And that person's chasing PFAS and spills and mercury and a bunch of real important things. But there's literally no time or budget for assisting a small program like Shoreline Zone. I would really like to be able to get our GIS staff to a point, or maybe they can educate me to a point that we could get back to producing those maps, because I think it's a failure on our part, to be perfectly honest. I think we should be able to do that, and it doesn't seem all that hard, but like anything on a computer, every time something gets updated, links break, things break in the formatting and the coding, and then it doesn't work. And if you're me, I don't know how to fix it. And unfortunately, maybe that will be my next thing, go back to school somewhere and get some training, or we get interns now, so maybe there's a smart kid who can do that for us. But so the procedure, kind of walking it backwards, you got your date of adoption, that's when you're voting on it. Before that, you had your warrant article and your agenda deadline. Before that, you had a public hearing, and then public notices, planning board considerations, map refinement, DEP draft review if you chose to do that, drafting a map, drafting an ordinance. So that's kind of the reverse order of how things work. But that's the end game. The key on all of this is the following through part of it. Once something gets voted on and approved, you're gonna submit a copy of those amendments to the department. And these days, COVID created a lot of problems for a lot of different people. One thing that was a benefit for us is you don't need to send us paper. You can do your ordinance up, have it attested, run it through the scanner, turn it into a PDF and email it to me. And then I can either print it out or just leave it as an electronic file and review it that way. Much, much simpler. I actually just got a variance application or Board of Appeals was looking at a variance. The town sent in their documents as they were supposed to 20 days prior to the meeting. But it was like a, giant thick packet, as variances are. You guys probably dealt with a few. And then they stuffed it in an envelope like this. They put a stamp on it and mailed it. And then it went to the department, it went to the mail room, and we got the big stamp on it, postage due. Because they didn't put enough postage on it, because they just put one stamp on the thing, so then it sits there for a week, 2 weeks. Then we pay the extra postage, so we can actually look at it. It ends up in my mailbox, the meeting's already occurred. We didn't get to put comment on it. Fortunately, in this case, it was fine, because it was a side setback, and we don't really get involved with that. But anyway, like I said, send in the amendment. After it's approved, we got 45 days to look at it, and review it. We try to turn those around a heck of a lot faster than that, although come spring, when a lot of towns have their normal town meeting season and you get, 10 of these coming in a week, they tend to back up a little bit, but a lot of towns are a little bit more on top of it these days. After that, depending on what you have chosen for a timber harvesting option, that's when you can make contact with the Forest Service. Another thing that I do on my end is when I get your ordinance in and say you've chosen option 1, so you're repealing, you're taking everything out of your ordinance because you want the Forest Service to deal with it. I take that PDF or create that PDF and then I ship it to the Forest Service. So they can look it over and make sure that they're gonna accept it as option 1. Because towns, you do a lot of work to try to get this thing right. And then the Forest Service can look at it and realize you left the definition of wind firm in there and they kick you from the program, all of a sudden you're option 3. Another bugaboo on my part, it's a pet peeve of mine, I don't think they should be doing that, but they got a boss. That's what the boss says to do, I guess that's what they do. But as soon as they send comment back saying, hey, this isn't gonna work for option 1 because they left that definition in there, I reach out to the town and say, hey, they're not gonna accept you. Would you like me to condition that out of them? It's a little on the hairy edge of if that's what I should be doing, but I also don't want the good work of the community to go to waste and have you go through another town meeting season to try to, fix that, especially when you're trying to repeal and you want the Forest Service to take over for you. After all of that comes through, if it's just a general approval, you get a nice letter. Thanks for the hard work. Here's your order. Everything looks good. If there's a couple things that need to be corrected, we can do a conditional order where we'll reach back out to the town and say, hey, there was a couple items here that weren't right. Here they are. Here's a draft of the conditional order. Mail it out to you, get it signed, approved, and the town just attaches the conditional order to the back of their ordinance, which seems to work pretty good. Anyway, so kind of hopscotching around here a little bit, but just trying to hit on some good topics for you folks. The minimum lot standards. This is something that comes up all the time. Creating new lots or building on lots. There has to be certain items that are there in place to be a legal conforming lot. Those standards are based on lot area, lot width, and shore frontage. I think we touch on all of those. So lot area, depending on what the proposed use is or where it is, whether it's a title or a non-title area, whether it's a commercial fisheries maritime type of use, the lots can be different sizes, but in general, in the inland, you're looking at a 40,000 square foot lot and having 200 feet of frontage to be a conforming lot in the shoreland zone. Now, that excludes land below the shoreline, so you can't count, the stuff that's out in the lake. I think that makes perfect sense to everybody. Land within a wetland and land beneath a road. So those last two come up a little bit more often because maybe you got a pocket of a wetland on your property. Or you have a old camp road going through. So those two items can get discussed when you're looking at lot area.
Does it exclude the land area in a, say, a public road right of way? The right of way that goes beyond the pavement?
I believe it would, because you're not the legal owner of. You're talking right away rather than an easement or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. I believe that it would, because that's come up a few times. I just dealt with somebody that wanted, it was an odd situation, actually. They didn't own the land across the road. And they wanted to cut a bunch of trees off. And then as it turns out, it was on town land. And half of that land was in the road right of way. And they were trying to basically cut for a view easement. And they had negotiated this thing out with the town to like, yeah, you can just cut whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, you can't just cut whatever, like you gotta follow the cutting standards. But we did have a pretty long discussion about that right of way issue. That's something I'm gonna look into a little bit more, because
I mean,
I
it's
just-
a right of way, it's not
Right.
land ownership.
Right, right. And the other thing too, I think of our old house up in Augusta. It was a 3-rod road. And I didn't, know much about it at the time. And there was a couple giant lime trees on it that were like falling and, they were dying. And I wanted to do something with it, and I soon realized I didn't even own that land. And then I realized the town actually owned halfway up my lawn to my house. So I didn't own the land that my fence was on, that 15 feet of my driveway was on, so all of that stuff, so. I kind of assumed that it would count against you, because you're not the legal owner of the land. Wow. Gonna have to make a note and look into that a little deeper. Lot width is another one that comes up quite a bit. It's Maine, right? So there's a lot of weird shaped lots, not everything is like, I always think of flying over like Oklahoma, where like fields are perfectly square or rectangles and stuff. It's just not how, all the spaghetti lots, all the weird little stuff over time. All the pieces of pizza lots that seem to have formed somehow. The real key for lot width is you gotta maintain whatever the frontage requirement is 100 feet deep on your lot. So in this image, obviously it starts to pizza out here a little bit, but as long as you maintain that 200 feet to that 100-foot part, then lot width, you're gonna be okay. Shoreline zoning, chapter 1000 at the DEP level, we don't have anything on side setbacks. So a lot of communities do. We do not. Thank goodness.
And that's just creating a new lot, that are going to existing lot.
Right, right. If there's a legally existing non-conforming lot, something that was done in the 60s, 40s, 30s, whatever, then yeah, that's completely different.
That's creating.
Yeah. So shore frontage. It seems like a fairly standard thing, but there's a real difference between how, a realtor looks at stuff frontage wise and how shoreline zoning does. Shoreline zoning is pin to pin. So if you got all this undulation going all over the place, we're not counting all those extra feet there. We're just going from point A to point B, pin to pin. Gotta have that frontage to be conforming. Measuring setback, again, another thing that seems fairly easy to do. But, the on-site application of it can get a little challenging, especially in situations like this where you got a steep slope. It's the horizontal distance between the normal high and the closest part of the structure. So you gotta take that slope out. Doing this is not easy. Should ask Rich how you used to do it, because a lot of times I'll walk around like with a pole. And hook a tape measure onto it, so we can get that horizontal thing, and then we're like walking up a slope to try to get what the actual horizontal distance is. A lot of CEOs that I've run into are using rangefinders, which I think still picks up the slope. Unless there's something that you can put up vertically that you can use your rangefinder to lock onto. But again, you know, everybody does the best they can with what they can.
So
So,
you break it down into increments, step way up the
Correct.
slope.
correct.
The way a surveyor would.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure when I have been doing that technique with my long pole and we got a nail hooked onto it and somebody holding on to the tape measure, you look silly for 20 minutes doing it, but you get a fairly good representation of what you're looking for out there. Item structure. This one comes up a lot. Again, one of those things that, you know, when you read the definition of how to do it, it seems fairly straightforward. Downhill side of the structure, highest point of the structure excluding, you know, chimneys and antennas and other items. I was surprised to see how many towns have, a lot of towns have like a combined ordinance where it's shoreline zoning and general land use. And they'll have two definitions of height. And some of them will take averages and on the other sides of buildings and all that stuff, and it gets all convoluted. Shoreline zoning wise, downhill side, mean original grade, prior to construction to the top of the structure. Fairly straightforward, but again, can be challenging sometimes.
That, the way you're, have it represented, that, let's say the lakeshore side is a deck. You
Yep.
measure from the bottom of the deck to the, peak of the house.
Rather than the back of the foundation.
Yeah,
Correct.
because former DEP guidance used to have it the other way, written guidance,
Oh, really?
that's online.
Oh, and the homeowner guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of
it was within the last 12 months.
Oh, okay, well, I'll look into it, yeah, well, I mean. Side of the structure, I mean, it could be a deck, it could be. You know, the foundation itself. Another thing that has come up over the last couple of years, and we're gonna get a lot of calls on it after these past storms. Especially in the coastal community, is we worked with the floodplain folks, Ted Baker and her group, to try to deal with the definition of height in a little bit different of a way, because FEMA and the floodplain folks want buildings coming up, so they get out of the floodplain, right? Homeowners want to get out of that floodplain because flood insurance is astronomically high. DEP's perspective always was, you bought the place, knowing what the insurance was, you deal with it. Well, enough momentum got going on it that a change was made. So now in a FEMA flood zone area, in statute, there's a different way to measure height. You can actually raise your building up higher than normally you could, making it taller beyond the allowable limit in that zone, because you're measuring from the bottom of the sill to the peak of the roof. And the bottom of the sill per floodplain needs to be outside of that area. But it doesn't let you go like 10 feet above that, so you're not like, you know, Louisiana and, putting stuff up on stilts all over the place. But at least get you up a little bit. The first people to do it, and it actually was on the news last night, was the Audubon Society down on Hog Island. And they raised that, one of their buildings, I think it was like 3 feet, it wasn't a ton. But their building was already 35 feet tall, so they couldn't raise it at all because they were gonna exceed the 35-foot height. But with this new definition and this new statutory deal, they were able to get it up, and it was really worthwhile for them because that building survived the storm very, very well. And the boathouse building that was just across on another shore, they had planned to do this fall, they didn't get a chance to do it. And it was completely knocked off the foundation and, you know, not destroyed, but knocked off the foundation and moved. So
Is that a change we can anticipate in chapter 1,000?
it's in the statute now, and so towns can put it in their ordinance immediately, but it will be going into chapter 1,000, absolutely. And actually, after this whole storm event, I had started to write a shoreline zoning newsletter. And I have scrapped half of that, and I'm just gonna focus on storm guidance to try to get it out as soon as possible, because my phone and email has just been nonstop for days and days and days. 90% of them have nothing to do with shoreline zoning at all. It's all NERPA regulations in terms of, can I put more riprap out? Can I repair my seawall? Can I do this? Can I do that? Really doesn't have anything to do with shoreline zoning per se, on that permitting side of things, but it's been nonstop. So I want to get some guidance out there. The DEP put a big guidance document together. And kind of classic DEP land. It was all based on the NERPA regulations and all the exemptions that are there, and didn't have any mention of shoreline zoning at all. And so I have created my own little thing that I add on to their document when I send it out to people. Because we just don't have all those exemptions.
And this will apply only to existing structures rather than new, so that it isn't an enticement for people to develop in the floodplain?
Correct. Right. I mean, unless the floodplain extends past the setback, then there may be some weirdo situations where that is, but I can't think of one currently, because if you're in the floodplain, you should be starting your setback beyond that point. But the way it's written may say otherwise, but no, it's not a situation where we're enticing it, because and you have to be in that FEMA flood zone as well. You know, mapped flood area. But
So just to be clear, the height of the structure is from the peak of the home to the bottom of the sill.
in that FEMA flood zone,
So if it's sloping down and you have a deck and the post goes down lower than the sill, you're not going to the bottom of the post.
right, not in that area, but in a general inland area where you're measuring on a great pond or something like that, you're going down to the bottom of the post.
So this picture here. Are you just going to the outside of the deck and measuring down, or are you going to where it touches the ground? Because if you move that post back in 3 to 4 feet, then, you know.
Right.
Maybe a couple feet.
No, you're going to the edge of the deck. So like the legs on this table are underneath there. When I'm taking my height, I'm pulling it from there. Right,
Drip line.
right. Drip line edge, we call it. Yep, yep.
So we were going in the same direction because we have gone through this before in the, board. So literally, if that deck would extend to the second tree from the shore, let's say that we could have done that. We're still measuring from the top of the deck.
No, you're measuring from the ground where the,
Yeah. So that picture is not,
that's not a deck, right? Maybe I should put a picture with a deck on there.
so that line,
Let's like, there's no roof on that.
okay,
It's a deck.
okay.
You're still measuring from there.
Oh, gotcha. I thought the line that where the arrow lands, it was a deck there.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Side view, okay.
Yep, side view, that's
Yeah.
probably like a
Gotcha.
patio, enclosed deck area,
Gotcha.
solarium.
So the deck ends where the line is touching, that's which is a
Yeah.
extended line.
Yep.
Thank you.
I've got a question on this. Say we have an existing house, it doesn't have a deck, is beyond the minimum setback. It is at the maximum height.
Yep.
If they want to add a deck now, it's gonna extend over a drop down, is that now gonna technically raise the height of the building? Or they're adding a deck?
Okay, so let's back up for a second. You got the house, the existing house, it's beyond 100 feet.
Yeah.
when they add the deck, are they gonna be inside 100 feet?
No.
Yeah, at that point, I mean, it'd have to be a pretty significant slope for it to make a difference, but. I mean, you're in a conforming location at that point.
Right.
So,
But technically, that could raise the height of the house, or no, is it something that really shouldn't?
you should never even come up with that.
I think you're still in shoreline zone, but within 200 feet, and you're going down, and it's gonna be a.
Right, if it's got a street, right, no, that's a good point.
You're in violation.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I can't imagine. Well, I guess at that point, I would encourage the town to use a little common sense on that one. You know, because the building's been there. It's not like they've changed the scope of the building. They didn't try to raise the height. They just added a deck on the front. Most of the cases that I run into with that stuff is the deck extends inside 100 feet. And then they just get cooked there. Like, nah, I can't do that.
At the same time, if your definition says this is a definition, I don't know how you cannot count.
I know, right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I completely agree, and it's kind of like and I don't know if I even have slides on, it's the individual private campsite thing, which can get a little cumbersome for communities. It says if you, now chapter 1000 is very specific, if you have a dwelling on the property and you're gonna have an individual private campsite, you need to have the lot area and dimensional requirements for the dwelling. And then an extra 30,000 square feet of lot area for an individual private campsite. Well, I think back to when I was a kid and my grandparents had a place in Richmond on Pleasant Pond. And every 4th of July, they would have a family gathering, family reunion. So people would come from everywhere. All us grandkids would like put tents out on the lawn. You know, aunts and uncles. One of them had like a camper trailer and they would bring it in and set it on their driveway. And I get calls annually about that exact situation where somebody's having a family reunion and the neighbors don't like it. Because that's what happens. And they call in a complaint like, oh, they got 2 tents and a camper over there and they don't have 120,000 extra square feet to have all those private campsites. I'm like, okay, you know. By the letter of the law, yes, you probably could have a case there. But I always encourage the CEOs that I deal with to, you know, again, use a little common sense on that. Like, are we talking about somebody hanging out for the summer? Or is it like when I was a kid where you're there for 2 days hanging out with your cousins? If you're hanging out there for 2 days, the camper isn't hooked up into their septic. They've got an extension cord running their camper, and, you know, 10 kids in a couple tents. Like that's, yeah, per the definition, probably, but per being a normal person, are you really gonna prosecute? I mean, you really wanna go out and you bring that in OV during the pig roast for the, you know, 50th wedding anniversary situation? But, yeah,
That was the same answer we gave.
yeah.
When we put it in there.
Yeah, it's just. I like that, that rule went in about the 30,000, because there's a lot of folks that do have a legit individual private campsite that gets used for a long period of time during the summer. But at the same time, the whole weekend thing, it's just,
I
it's tough.
thought that individual private campsite was for a designated campsite, not like say, oh, we're just gonna put up like I said, an RV gravel, but it was an area that's specifically designated for a tent or a campsite.
I mean, it could be, but a lot of people don't go in and put in like a gravel pad or a tent platform or something. They just, you know, they own property out on a lake and, you know, maybe not in a more developed lake, but, you know, in a situation where you're more woodsy, people might not do that. That's a challenging one. It's the calls, those are the calls each summer that I don't particularly care for. So I just feel bad, because I know what I'm about to say is probably not consistent with what the law says, but what would Rich do? Like, he would say, just go for it. Like, don't bang people up on that. And it's the same thing that I've dealt with and again, I'm kind of off topic here, but it's a good discussion point. I had a case 4 years ago. CEO called in and somebody had cut a bunch of saplings and seedlings out in front of this camp. And he got complaints on it, so we went out to the look. And yeah, the camp hadn't been used for 18 months, almost 2 years. And, you know, if you don't use a piece of property, Mother Earth is gonna start taking it back. You know, it's just how it works. And so that's what was happening. And we showed up and the property owner was there and they freely admitted, like, yeah, no, we haven't been at the property. And yes, we did cut those down because we're gonna start using the property. And, you know, the CEO was like, geez, you know, it's primarily reverted. It's a phrase that you'll find in chapter 1000 when you get into the vegetation requirements. It's usually talking about farm fields or other things like that. It's not usually talking about the area out in front of your camp, because that doesn't usually happen. Well, in this specific case, it did. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, well, you know, by the law here, you probably shouldn't have done that. But let's dig into this a little deeper. Why haven't you used the property in the last 2 years? Like what allowed this to all grow? I was like, I've been in Afghanistan for 18 months. Should turn to the CEO, I'm like, you better back off this one. You do not want to hit the front page of the KJ where you're running a vet, you know, through an NOV, through a CA for cutting down 15 saplings when the person's serving our country and protecting our bacon. You know, it's not really where you want to be. And I have one other case that was similar to that where, you know, somebody was going through cancer treatment. You just gotta take into account some of those items. And some towns do that and some towns don't. I just make sure I give people the tools to make the decision they need to make and, you know, it's the municipality that's in charge of administering and enforcing their law. So, you know, I don't say do or don't, I just provide a little advice and point out some pitfalls if you're about to step into one. But anyway, back to the show here. So non-conforming structures. You know, it's a lot of the shoreline zone has non-conforming structures. And all that means that they were legally existing non-conformities, meaning that they were there prior to the ordinance going into place or some part of the ordinance being adopted. You know, if these structures can be expanded, we're gonna get into the expansion principles here in a little bit. There's some, you know, rules behind that. If you need to relocate a structure, if the structure's been damaged or removed by more than 50% of the market value, then you gotta move it back to the greatest practical extent. And that's a call that's made by the planning board or its designee. So the planning board actually takes into account some of those items for the designee, which is 90% of the time, that's the CEO. So, and this is something that we're gonna have some hard conversations. Shoreline zoning staff's gonna have some hard conversations over the next few months, because there's a lot of coastal communities that their structures got completely washed out. And some of those are not functionally water dependent. They're not an operational necessity. And, you know, if they're gone off the face of the earth and they need to be replaced, then the town is gonna be in the unenviable position to talk to these folks and say, hey, yeah, you can rebuild, but you're gonna have to rebuild way back there. And to be honest with you, I'm sure there's gonna be a handful of towns that just say, put it back where it was, and they won't even do that, and then that will open up a whole new can of worms, but.
Until the next storm.
Right, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, everybody wanted. A few years ago, everybody wanted to cut every branch, every tree down, so they'd have this perfect view of the water. And the last, you know, 5 or 7 years, I've seen less and less of that. People want to plant more and they don't want to cut the limbs down because they don't want, you know, the party barge parade on Sundays coming by and like looking in their windows, or jet ski guy or whatever. So that's been a nice trend, but yeah, there has been people that have willingly moved back to try to get away from some of that stuff, but God, there's tons of people that just want to be right on top of it.
Yeah, well, my comment was more directed at this is the new reality, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, you build it, rebuild it. Unless you build it higher, better, stronger,
right.
you're gonna go through the
Get
whole
this
same
thing again,
process
right.
in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's, it's on point there too, because I live in West Gardner, I grew up in Gardner. I was downtown in the flood of '87. So I remember Hannaford being flooded to the top of the doors and the liquor store and all the windows breaking and liquor bottles floating everywhere. I was in high school, but all the high school kids in canoes, like gathering up all the liquor bottles. And then going to the hospital because they didn't realize that the liquor bottles were covered with poo water and then they got all sick and probably got some alcohol poisoning. But to your point, it's amazing to me that we just went through this again before Christmas and Hannaford's spending millions of dollars to like rebuild that store. And I'm like, man, there's gotta be some land up on Brunswick Avenue that's nowhere near any of this stuff that you wouldn't have to deal with this all the time, but they're going for it. Gonna be closed for a while, I guess. Went into Harvey's and needed to get some screws and stuff, and I walked in the door. And, I've been going there since I was a kid, and the smell of mold in that place since it was flooded and all the flooring was ripped out, oh God, I felt so terrible. But I got my screws and got out of there before I had an allergy attack, but. So, reconstruction standards, so if less than 50% of the market value of the structure is removed, damaged, or destroyed, you can put it back right in place. And it's, the key on this is, number one, market value, which I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not sure how you dealt with it all those years, but I wish it was something different. I don't know how to get to it because market value is a challenging number to come up with. It's not your assessed value, what you're taxing people on, it's willingness to pay. And willingness to pay is, for me, I understand it very well. I have a degree in economics. And, doing regression analysis and taking everything out, except the value of the structure itself is something I understand. But you get to a lot of, planning boards and stuff, and I actually had 3 people ask this week, well, how do I determine market value?
All real.
Correct, but there again, I had a realtor do a market value assessment on a gazebo and they told me it was worth $180,000. Yeah, because it was located 20 feet from the lake. And I'm like, what? And it was one of those gazebos that you could buy at Lowe's or Home Depot. And I clicked on the ad and sent them the link and said, no, your gazebo's worth $7,000. I'm like, no, it's worth 180 because you'd never be able to build it again. You're right, but no, yeah.
Key to that definition of it was, not where it is,
Correct,
what the building is.
that's right. Very true, and I think that's on the very next slide, actually. Relocation required if you're removing more than 50% of the market value of the structure and removed, damaged, or destroyed by any means. So, if it's all gone, 70% of it's gone, then it's gotta go away. Get back to a conforming location or a more conforming location. Here's kind of the slide that Rich was talking about. Market value only relates to the value of the non-conforming structure. Structure has the exact same value, whether it's located right next to the lake or right next to a landfill. And, I always tell people I'm gonna start using that sentence a little bit more, but basically, if you pick that building up and you put it anywhere in your town, that building is worth the same amount of money. And that's one area where the assessed value is kind of helpful, because when you guys do that, you have a land value and a structure value. So it clearly kind of denotes that, there's 2 separate things, but that market value thing is tough. And to your point about the realtor, I often encourage towns to, if there's an issue, if there's a discrepancy, if somebody comes to you with a $180,000 gazebo, maybe the town spends a little money and hires an independent assessor, an independent realtor to make that market value call. It's kind of like, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but The same thing I always suggest when you're dealing with hazard trees, kind of like we were talking about earlier. Usually towns want to see an arborist, make a call on this thing is an actual hazard tree, it's dead, diseased, or dying, because you can't always tell. By the look of it, I taught a training class out in Sydney, and I was there 2 weeks before the training, and there's this big spruce tree, 60 feet tall, looked perfect. I came back 2 days before the training to set out the grid so we could do the point system stuff, and the tree was down. I'm like, oh my God, look at this, thing. How was that down? And I went over and looked at it, and it was a drinking straw. It was completely hollow. But from the outside, it looked perfect. I mean, it looked like one of those trees you'd see in New York, as the Christmas tree, in the square, but you don't really know. So when you get to those, I advise towns to have an arborist review it that isn't the same person that's gonna be firing up the chainsaw. Because there's an economic incentive. I'm not saying everybody would do this. But there's an economic incentive for someone that removes trees to say that's a hazard, because a lot of times it's like $2,500 a tree to take them down. Where, somebody independent may not make the same call, but. Everybody knows the arborists they deal with in their town, so maybe you have a better feeling of who's forthright and who may not be. So some other things about the 50% market value. You don't take into consideration material labor costs, you don't take in basic repairs, shingling, roofs. I've kind of taken the tact of, the items that tend to wear out aren't items that we typically include in the 50% threshold. Like if somebody's shingles are falling off or they need to replace their roof, that isn't part of that 50%. Or if you had single pane windows from, the 60s. And you wanna put some double pane in, or, some better windows, then those are wearable items. Now, if you're gutting the place and you're taking it down to studs, it's a whole nother deal. And obviously you got the, other items of paint, and I had one say, well, we're removing all the wallpaper. Does that count? I'm like, how much wallpaper are you removing? I mean, even if the house is only worth $100,000, you gotta remove $51,000 worth of wallpaper? Like, what kind of wallpaper you got? But anyway. So one thing that's key for planning boards or designee is the relocation review. So you're trying to get the structures moved back to a conforming location, or at least a more conforming location. When you're taking into the account, characteristics of the land, steep slope, is there bedrock? Location of the existing structures, you got a barn, a garage, the septic, where's the septic located? Where's your well? What's the existing foundation? What's the condition of that? Those are all factors that are in play. And what the department very rarely steps in and has issue with Graham's practical extent review. We have, made some comments when we're asked about that stuff, but I will say it is. I have a lot of top 10 lists, watched a lot of Letterman when I was younger, but it's definitely a top 10 item that people complain about. Specifically, the neighbor that sits with the binoculars and watches everything you do all the time. So the biggest suggestion for a planning board or designated planning board is make sure that whatever criteria you're using for relocation, you document it very well. And you have good backup on that, and you put it in writing. You don't just say, oh, it looked pretty good to move it 10 feet back. That's a little bit further back. You want to say, well, they couldn't move any further back than 10 feet because there's an existing well, an existing septic system, or they plan to put in a new septic system a couple of years from now when they get the money. We don't want to put it over the one area that's going to perk. So just like if you're, dealing with a violation as a CEO, document. Take pictures, write things down. Take all your pictures from the same location, all of that stuff.
That's a good question. for you.
Yeah,
Let's say we have a, structure that is right, non-conforming right across the water, and it's in an incline, and then there's a big, mountain of, dirt over here. When I read that, ordinance, the way I thought about the structure is like a piece of Lego, and we jank it up, and it was gonna be reconstructed, and we kind of move it around in the lot to where it cannot go back anymore.
that's correct. It's
So-
exactly how you deal
So we have to think of it like, a piece of Lego,
with it. Yep,
it's house it around that, and lift it up from there, and move it back, and where it cannot go back anymore.
yep, and document the reasons that it can't go back in, whether it's
Understand?
ledge, trees,
Yeah.
whatever.
So if there's a ledge of dirt or whatever there, and we'll move back here and stay there. And later, the person with this building can come back here and take that ledge out with the construction and everything else.
Yeah, that's. So if it's dirt back there, like your first example, then as a planning board or designee, I would be saying, you know. Have you looked into removing that dirt so you can get it back further? If it's ledge. Then, you know, you can ask the same question. You could blast and get some of that out of there, to move it back further.
But it's not practical, they're gonna be investing, taking that out.
Right, the key to greatest practical extent review, in my opinion, is there's no consideration for economics at all. So if they come to you and say, it's gonna cost me 50 grand to blast that ledge out of there. That's not in your ordinance. There's no consideration for economics. So if it can move back, then it should. If you as a planning board decide that that's as far as it can get, and then they go behind you and blast that ledge, which has happened in a neighboring community, and it was a complete crap show because they spent $500,000 blasting all the ledge and created what was a very small, modest camp in Maine, and they made a mansion full with turrets and the whole deal.
I think this is the other thing. Where that structure can be moved, also neighborhood camps were about the same line.
Yeah.
The internal neighborhood camps were right about the same line. So that can be considered, isn't it?
I don't, it's not part of their lot, so it shouldn't be. I mean, where other people's houses are shouldn't really be a consideration. It's your lot, you're looking at that lot, what can happen on that lot, and can you move it back to a conforming location?
Basically, if they move the camp and they can build behind, they should move the camp where? All the way back.
Right, it kind of gets to this is the exact situation. You have the original location the original location of the structure,
Yeah,
the original footprint.
Yeah.
And then you pick that up, your Lego block,
yeah,
and you move it back to the most conforming location as possible.
Yeah.
This slide is kind of designed because this is what we've tried to avoid for years, where you move back and then you put a big expansion off the back, because you can only expand so much inside the setback. But the structure has to
so
go back
if it can be expanded behind, it means that the relocation could be moved.
further back, right, and you have to look at least relocation and expansion as, the way I've always described it is two separate applications. You relocate first. And then you do your expansion. I know it comes in all as one packet, right? That's how it is. But that's the mechanism to get there. That way, because I get this all the time. Like, oh, well, I can only go back to here because I'm putting this giant expansion on the back. No, you put this back and then expand laterally, and then the back.
So it's two steps.
Yep.
First one, you relocate.
Yep.
To the farthest point you can do it.
Yep.
And then we'll talk about expansion.
Absolutely,
And expansion can go to the front,
right, can't get any more non-conforming,
Yeah.
right?
can be to the sides.
You can expand laterally or off the back, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Practical is up for debate as well, because
right,
it doesn't say to go back as far as it can go. It says as far as practical. So, getting back to that land hump you're talking about, that wasn't practical to dig that out, just to remove that. But if this person wants to do something unpractical, that's up to them. You know, so as far as the land sets and what the permit was, moving it back to there was the furthest practical extent. If they wanna come in and do further stuff that's not practical, that's up to them. You know, but from what we see and what's in front of us, it's all up into interpretation to the planning board. And everything I've heard from him tonight is all up to interpretation to the planning board. I haven't heard anything that says other than that. Other than guidelines. So it's all up to what we interpret. And practical is a wide open word. It doesn't say, move it back as far as you can. It says to the practical extent.
it says the greatest practical extent.
Right,
So I've seen towns, and I understand your point there, but I have seen towns actually put in their permit application or their approval. That if that situation happened and you got some dirt back there or whatever. And they move it back to the edge of it, they'll actually write in the approval that, yep, that's that.
Yep.
Like, that way it precludes somebody from coming in the next year and blasting off that ledge or bulldozing that hump and then making a giant place because they used practical as their hook.
Well, to build on Craig's point, though, we've had applications, and this is part of a trend that we're seeing here in Belgrade of people buying small camps on, non-conforming camps on non-conforming lots, demolishing them, moving them back to the greatest practical extent, and then building a $1.2 million camp to replace it. And, we've had applicants come to us and they were right up straight with us and said, we're gonna move it back farther than the greatest practical extent because we can afford to. We're gonna blast those rocks that are
Right.
the size of Volkswagens. We've also, had the situation that you described. And they've told us that they were gonna do it, where they didn't move it back, you know, we couldn't require them to move it back any farther than those boulders that are the size of Volkswagens. They were upfront and said they were gonna do it on their own, and we approved it where, as Craig said, you know, to the, what we thought was the greatest practical extent, because those boulders were there.
Right. And then they come in the next
fact
year
that
and
they had
blast
more
it.
money than God, you know, wasn't a factor.
but also on the practical extent you just mentioned too, if they plan on putting the septic in behind that. Well, we have to take that into consideration too.
And a lot, I mean,
You know, so that's, you're gonna be a certain distance away from that septic.
The biggest actually impediment usually is the power lines.
yes, yeah,
What about road? What if they, I mean, if there's a road right there, then they might have to take that into consideration.
Absolutely.
to expand.
absolutely. And, you know, I've run into situations, it all depends on what kind of road, right? You know, where, and, West Gardner, 126, you know, obviously you don't want somebody like building 5 feet away from 126, you're gonna have a car coming through your building. Whereas, you know, if you got camp road where people are going 5 miles an hour, you get kind of close to that, that's probably not as big of an issue. And I've actually seen, do you guys have road setbacks?
We do.
You do. So, one thing that comes up, and I've had this discussion with other people where, they'll say, yeah, well, we moved it back to, greatest practical extent. But we got this road setback issue and, you know, so they're actually gonna leave it forward a little bit so they could get their expansion off the back. Yeah, that's not it. You need to move it all the way back to that point where you can't move it anymore, and then you do your expansion.
So that would be the
So you
size.
have to do it laterally going out the side.
Unless it's a septic.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And people play that game too, and I'm sure Rich has played that game a few times as well. I'm putting a septic back here. Then nobody ever files a septic permit, there's no septic that ever goes in, but that's the card they play. And I mean, yes, there is some interpretation. Yes, you have to kind of believe that people are gonna be honest and forthright.
Well.
I'm
it
losing
seems
a
to
little
me
bit of
they
that.
should, at that point, be submitting a HHE
Right,
form with their application.
That would be good.
As, showing, that they're serious about it.
right. Or at least showing
Otherwise,
they've got a
it's
septic
hearsay.
design, so they paid somebody for something. But there are those folks out there. I dealt with them tons that will absolutely go pay for a septic design and then never build it. Just like the people that would pay for $50,000 of rock to be put on their shoreline and cut every tree. And say, hey, I had to cut the trees because I had to put the rock. But we've dealt with that issue, so.
Guidelines still don't have sideline setbacks. do they? Some towns and this.
Absolutely.
I think ours is one. Probably one something.
And I always tell people too, like, somebody would come in for a variance to do a certain thing, to stay within a certain area. And they're using, hey, a sideline or, road setback. Like, well, you can get a variance for sideline setback and road setback, depending on, again, I'm not trying to put people's safety in the way of the road. But wouldn't it be better for the environment to give a variance for sideline setback or road setback than a variance for resource setback? I mean, China Lake's the perfect example. Like, Bill Flem, they taught that erosion sediment control class for years and years and years. He always told a story about somebody that bought a piece of property on China Lake back in the sixties. They paid $125,000 for it. Huge money in the sixties. They had it all the way up to the 2000s, and somebody got sick. They needed to sell the property because they needed to pay for medical bills. Worst case scenario, to have to sell this property. They throw it on the market for $250,000. They bought it in the sixties. It's 40 years later. It's on a lake. That seems pretty reasonable money. Not for a state worker, but for other people, maybe reasonable money. They throw it on the market. No bites. They reduce it to 225. No bites. Reduce it to 2. No bites. They walked that thing all the way back to 150. They finally sold it at 150. So over 40 years on a place that you've been maintaining and loving, you only made 25 grand in 40 years. The reason? Terrible water quality. Nobody wants their kid to jump off the end of their dock and come out looking like the Swamp Thing in August. And that can happen in every lake in Maine, just like that. I mean, we can pull up a Google Earth image right now of Sabattis Pond. And if I zoomed out, you'd never even know it was water. It's green. And all those little things, those little incremental things that people do, or people let people do, can have dramatic impacts collectively over time. And it's planning boards, select boards, CEOs, Board of Appeals, town management. You're the front line. You're the folks protecting the water quality of Maine. And I usually say this stuff at the end of the presentation, but I've worked for the DP for 20 years. And I started out in the Norfolk Field Services game, running around, dealing with all the violations and all of that stuff, right? And for a long time, I was like, man, we're really making a difference here. We're really making a difference. We're stopping erosion. We're stopping this kind of development. We're really making a difference. It wasn't until I spent some time with Rich that I realized, yeah, we're making a difference, but not like shoreline zoning was. Because you can come in for a PBR right now and build whatever you want at 25 feet. And they'll sign it every day and twice on Sunday. It's ridiculous. It actually pisses me off to no end, because when I was a field services person, I'd bring my PBRs over to Rich, be like, hey, does this look right? He's like, that's not gonna meet shoreline zoning. All right, deny that thing, send her back. The trend went away from that. When I left field services, the trend went right back to path of least resistance. We're just signing off on stuff and letting it fly.
We have that problem this town. We have seen it in the last, 2 years.
Yep.
We have seen more and more. And there's certain, contractors that know that that's the easy way they go, they get a PBR.
Right. Yeah, well, here, there's a slide coming right up. I'll even jump the gun. That PBR means nothing, zero. Because right in the standard conditions, it says, this permit is not valid unless it meets shoreline zoning rules. And there's actually legislation today to rectify that. So at no point are people going to be coming in for a full permit, a permit by rule, a wetland law, a wetland fill permit, none of that crap. If it is known to violate shoreline zoning, it's out. I'm calling it the Terry Brackett bill, because he's the guy that called us out on it. He literally said, this guy just cut 35 trees down, he's replanting 5 of them so he can install his riprap. And he's like, how did you guys approve that? I'm like, well, what do you mean, Terry? I don't understand. He's like, they're cutting down 35 trees, they're putting 5 back. Like, that isn't compliant with shoreline zoning. How did you approve that? Like, well, they're not looking at that. You know, they're doing a NERPA review. They're looking at engineering of rock and riprap slopes. They're not looking at that at all. He's like, oh, he's like, so those people work in like another building? Like, no, Terry, what are you talking about? They don't work in another building. He's like, oh, they're on a different floor. At that point, I knew the jig was up. Like, no, Terry, they don't work on another floor. They sit 15 feet from me. He's like, exactly. You guys are the experts. We're all volunteers. He's like, you guys are approving stuff that clearly violates shoreline zoning, and then those people are bringing the permits to the planning board and saying, I'm approved. And the planning boards, for whatever reason, may not have been aware that they're the hook. You guys are the most restrictive. It's not the DEP. And they'll hate me for saying this, and I know Jess, she came from the permitting side, but now she's seen the light. You know, in my opinion, over the last 10 years, we literally became the Department of Permit. There's environmental protection in land on the NERPA side of things has gone downhill dramatically.
So a PBR can go over the plan.
No, BBR is worth nothing. It's worth the $308 you gotta pay for them now. I've been here so long that PBRs were $35 when I started. Remember that? $35. You could build a pier on the ocean for $35.
PBRs are required. It's a necessary step.
Yeah.
And to your credit, or at least Cameron's, every email I get with PBR on it says, please be sure this meets your locals.
Yeah.
Cameron's.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's asking,
Yeah.
oh, it's not telling
Yes.
to review and make sure that it doesn't violate rules.
Yeah, very, very fortunately for us at the DEP, Cam Dufour has been a great employee, and he is really driven to learn, and he was willing to do things that others weren't. He sat down with me and said, hey, how did you used to do this? And nobody ever asked that. Like, here's all my templates. They're old, but they're still valid. And that line is from the templates. Like, every field D I ever issued, every permit we ever issued that I was ever part of, said the same exact thing. And that's standard language within the PBR itself, right in chapter 305. Applicability standards.
So besides, having a PBR, there have to be the application to the town.
Yep.
And shoreline.
Yep.
And both of them have to.
That's right. In most cases, unless there's something that you guys don't need a permit for that we would, and I can't really think of any situation.
I'm just not sure if on ordinance we have that clear that You can have a PBR, but unless you have a shoreline application, you cannot do it. I don't think we have that in our. ordinance.
Well, I mean, your ordinance says something in terms of, you know, you cannot construct, build, disturb anything within a certain distance of the water without seeking permits or doing it in a conforming way. Everybody's ordinance is a little bit different, but some sort of that base language is in there somewhere.
The land use.
Yeah. It should.
Needs a permit, or doesn't.
I mean,
We, or usually Rich mentions that when it comes up, you know, that you're gonna need a NERPA permit.
Yeah.
But we don't make it a condition of our permits or,
no,
you know, hold up our permitting process for, requiring them to have that first.
yeah, no, and I actually tell people to do it the other way. Because how much is a permit to do something in the shoreline zone, something basic? And how much do you guys charge for a permit fee?
I don't know, what we charge.
And if it's accessory structure, primary structure.
Let's just say it's an accessory structure.
Same as 1970s probably.
So,
6 cents a square foot with a 15 minimum.
so let's say it tops out at $50. You're building a significant accessory structure, $50. A PBR is 308. So I always tell people, why don't you go to the most restrictive first, get your permit, and then come back to us. And that leads us back into that legislation. It's actually gonna be part of it. Like, there isn't gonna be a condition there that you have to prove that you have a permit from the town to do whatever. But it does, the legislation is there that it has to be compliant with the shoreline zoning rules. And based on that conversation with Terry, now every full individual NERPA permit that includes vegetation removal, structures built inside the buffer, and a few other items all come to me. I review them just like IF&W does, just like Submerged Lands does, just like some of the other review agencies that they send them to, and I make comment. And that's one of those things where I always thought was really squirrely that, you know, you got somebody, like Terry pointed out, sitting right next to you that would know that this isn't compliant, but you're not asking them. Because unfortunately, shoreline zoning may not be the most respected group in the DEP umbrella, definitely in land. But with all the storms and all this climate change stuff, we're getting more and more important every day.
TPRs ever get issued with conditions? Like certain types of erosion control, sediment actions.
Well, yes and no. You put in, when you put in your application, you say what you're gonna do on it and you're held to those standards. So if you say that you're gonna put in erosion control at 45 feet and the field services come out and you don't have it, then yeah, you got a problem. But there's nothing specific in terms of a standard condition. Like, that's something you would find on a full permit. Because they send in engineered plans and all that stuff that you're tied to, and the permit is tied to that. Wow. So I say new on the slide, but you know, 2015, so it's been a minute. But we changed from floor area and volume to footprint and height in a tiered situation. Here in your community, you guys have the cap, right? You don't do the 30%. You do 800, 1,000, 1,500 as you move back. Good for you, like that.
Too hard to administer otherwise.
It gets a little challenging, does get a little challenging. Also, you know, now something new, newer is you gotta record all those plans at the registry of deeds. That way, if all of us walk outside and get hit by a bus, there is some sort of record of some of this stuff. I'm sure you're,
What happens if somebody fails to do so? I know under the variance thing, it says you don't do it within, 60 days or whatever, 30 days, it's null and void, you read.
Oh, I like that.
But I just wondering what would happen if somebody didn't.
Right, so that's a question that's come up on the registry part, from communities like, who registers it? The applicant or the town? Most towns have the applicant do it. But there is a select group that the town does it, but that's an expense. So I guess what I would say to that is, if the town's gonna do it, which may be the better mechanism, so it actually gets done, I would increase that fee to cover that cost. Or I like it as a condition of a permit. I mean, there's nothing in chapter 1000, or I'm sure in your local ordinance, that states you can't put conditions on approvals. You put that same condition on there. You got 60 days to register and stuff.
Good thing about the variance one is that's actually in statute.
Yeah.
So you don't have to
Right.
worry about whether you've done something above and beyond.
Absolutely.
We're just talking though about expansions of non-conforming structures, right?
Yep.
To be honest with you, we've never required that per se.
Right,
It's in our ordinance, the applicant's responsible for it.
right.
I have yet to find, more than 5 applicants that ever read the ordinance.
Right.
I'm just curious, how other towns do that to ensure it's actually complied with.
Right.
I assume the purpose of it is so that it shows up in title searches. So that, a potential new owner knows what they're buying.
That's definitely one of
And
them.
what, with that, they might not be able to expand it any further.
That's the key. Because I'm sure your town is great with it. I know way too many towns that absolutely are miserable at record keeping. And are even worse at keeping the property cards updated. So that's a mechanism that kind of avoids that.
Well, to be honest with you, that's the reason we didn't go with the 30%, because our property records.
Right.
Leave something to be desired going back to 1989,
Yeah, Yeah.
and when we looked into it, we couldn't find half of them.
right. Yep. No, I agree.
So how do you, what's the baseline?
Yeah, it's
You
super
can't establish
difficult.
it.
Right, and I love Google Earth because that history button, that little clock that you can go back in time and see stuff grow and. You know, you can be on the phone with somebody and be like, yeah, you got the red pickup, and they're like, what? Right. Yeah, he's like, no, I got rid of that. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, 3 years ago, you had a red pickup. And 2 years ago, I can see you want an excavator, digging where you're not supposed to be. But a lot of towns, what they do is, as part of the approval, like you guys write up an approval and somebody signs it, right? If it's a planning board permit, it gets approved before it goes over to Hans for, final sign off by CEO. They just put it as like a standard condition on there.
I was wondering if that's how it would
Yeah.
be implemented.
Please be reminded, this needs to be recorded with the registry of deeds. And then if you wanted to put in, are you gonna chase it? Probably not, but you could put in that language, maybe not as aggressive as the variance, because that 60-day thing, it's a pretty tight window. But I mean, you can put 90 days, give them a little extra time, just something, throw it on there.
We just got a driveway permit from the state. And the owner had 90 days to file it or it's void.
Yeah.
Approval of that, I just took it to the registry and did it, so.
Yeah.
It was a 90-day approval, and the state actually sent a notice to the owner, because we have to be buying the car. And the owner that said, you're within 45 days and this has not been registered.
Wow.
So the state, at least on their driveway permit, is tracking it, which I was pleasantly surprised that we can track it.
Yeah, and by the state, it's the DOT, because it's a state road.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, there you go.
Well,
I guess resources.
well, I don't want to get off track here, but what you said about registering of the deeds, now subdivisions. In shoreline zone.
Yeah.
Usually their approvals get registered with courthouse too.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a DEP subdivision, something that went in front of the department
It's
for,
all entirely in shoreline zone, so if they had, the approval. Basically, all the standards of approval are enforceable.
Yeah.
In perpetuity, until.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something like that.
And the filing fee was $25 to register.
Yeah.
So we could easily just add that to whatever we're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't realize how, that's good information, because I know we register like all the DEP stormwater permits, site location of development, subdivisions, all that stuff. That all just gets registered. The admin staff does their thing, blah, blah, blah. They got our account, so they register.
And a subdivision where they say one 3-bedroom seasonal dwelling is allowed,
Yeah,
no full-time house,
right,
no fourth bed,
correct,
no accessory structure.
right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Unless it gets in front of the planning board for approval.
Yeah.
Well, then they'd have to amend their subdivision plan, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's ways to like amend stuff so you can move it forward, but yeah, I mean, if that's the base and they're not following the base, then you got fish on the line, set the hook. But, so, you know, this last part of it, you know, you can do the cap or the 30%, you guys are doing the caps, that's fine. Limited expansions within 25 feet, also limited expansions in an RP district. So footprint. When you, I mean, we got the definition here, basically everything covering the earth. When you're looking at a building, it's drip edge, drip edge. You know, same thing with the deck, front of the deck, on what the post is, anything is like covering the earth. And people say, well, I got grass growing on my deck, doesn't matter. It's drip edge, deck, all of it counts. Other things that count, you know, unenclosed structures, patios, decks, things that are cantilevered over. Some folks will have, a deck coming off the second floor. You know, got one of those dealings with a slider and come out. That's still footprint. Cause it's, you know, covering the earth. There may be grass growing underneath it, but it's still part of the footprint. So it gets
Literally, you
counted.
have to look at the structure from the top and put a lamp onto it, and whatever shadows underneath, that's. a
Yeah, that's
footprint.
good. Yeah, I like that. Yep. Yep.
Most of the patios don't have roof over it.
Right, right. But the patio, it'll stick out like a sore thumb because it's a bunch of rock or whatever. Other definitions where footprint comes in play, expansion of the structure, expansion of use, floor area, removing unenclosed structures, and non-conforming structure added footprint to that. So here's kind of the breakdown. I'm pretty sure you guys got all these slides, because I'm pretty sure I sent them to everybody at one point or another. So I'll just click and click. So, you know, obviously the 30%, just take that out of there. If you're inside 15 feet, if you're inside 25 feet, max height is 15 feet, or the height of the existing structure. Can have an expansion up to 800 square feet. If your building isn't already 800 square feet. No accessory structure expansion inside 25 feet. Outside of 25, inside 75,000 square feet, max height of 20 feet, and that's maximum combined total footprint. No accessory structure expansion closer to the shoreline than the principal. Outside of 75 feet, 1,500 square feet, 25 feet in height, again, no accessory structure expansion closer to the resource than the principal structure. Outside of 100 feet, then you're just dealing with lot coverage and a height limit of 35 feet. When you get into coastal wetlands or river, trip stream, those type of items, you're only dealing with a 75-foot setback for non-conforming structures, so it's the 15 feet tall, 800 square feet, 20 feet tall, outside is 25 feet, and 1,000 square feet. For you folks that are here from other communities, that may have the 30% thing that is in play, in some of these other communities, it can be a challenge, to have both of them in there, but that is part of the law, so. That's how it all comes to be. In an RP district, obviously the same expansion principles, out to 75 feet, so 15 feet, 20 feet in height. once you get it past 75 feet, all the way out to 250. It's an RP, it's 250-foot setback, you're tied to that 1,500 square feet. And a max height of 25 feet, and that's maximum combined total footprint. So, then we get into the whole. Gorgeous packet there, I see peeking out of his binder. Obviously, don't really need to ask all the questions, but this is a situation, what can you actually expand? Let me go back here, because this is something that comes up constantly. So this camp here, I call that a straddler, right? It's straddling that 25-foot. And what that expansion language says is you can expand a structure that's inside 25 feet if it's wholly located, meaning the whole entire structure is inside 25 feet, then you can do something. If you're a straddler and you straddle the 25-foot line, that's when you get into this situation where you can't do jack. In terms of expanding the part that's inside 25 feet, you could expand the back of the camp or the shed or the garage in this, well, the garage is outside, but in this specific situation. Get on to the next one. Be expanded, you got a camp inside 25 feet, you got a garage inside 25 feet, and you got a shed outside 25 feet. So the camp, if you had the 30% provision, you could expand the camp by 30%. You can't do anything with the garage because it's an accessory structure inside the 25-foot setback, so that's a no. Or you could expand off the shed. Most people aren't gonna waste their expansion on a shed, but never say never. People do all kinds of stuff. So here, similar, slightly different situation. Your camp's outside of 25, inside of 75, the garage. It's close to the water, the shed must be a boathouse. What can you do? Basically, all you got is camp. Can't do anything with the garage closer to the water than the principal. Can't do anything with the accessory, it's closer than the principal, and it's inside 25 feet as an accessory structure. Yep. Go on there, clicky clicky. All right, so downtown Portland somewhere, functionally water dependent stuff. The base definition here is it can't be located away from water. It's an operational necessity, something that you kind of touched on earlier. When you get into, what the actual definition of functional water dependent is, includes fish related storage, shoreline structures for erosion control purposes. But it excludes recreational boathouse buildings. Now, this is a change that happened prior to me, but a good one, but it's something I talk to people about a lot. If this community specifically, I have a lot of ties to Belgrade. My grandfather, Walter, started Clark Buick, Clark Marine, and Days Marina. So I spent a lot of my days as a kid throwing quarters against the wall out at Days Marina, gambling with the mechanics for sodas. And one of the coolest things I used to think of when I was a kid is it was either Thursday or Friday. My dad and one of the mechanics, we'd hop in the mechanics, old Chris Craft, old wooden boat, classic 1950s mahogany boat, just like so cool. And we'd go on a little tour, and this guy's place had an old boathouse, but it was one of those ones that, for me, it was a garage. I mean, I had a darn garage door opener, and you put the garage door opener and you drive the boat in. I used to think that was the coolest thing as a kid. The reason I mention that is if you're dealing with people that have those, tell them to protect them, maintain them, take good care of them. Because once they get removed, damaged by more than 50%, they're gone. They'll probably still have the square with the building on top of it. That'll be gone. And my grandfather, even though he, you know, have these businesses and stuff, the property I mentioned out in Richmond on Pleasant Pond. That was something I couldn't understand when I was a kid either, because they had one of those square things, and that's where they parked the party barge thing. But originally, there was a boathouse on top of it, but apparently there was some winter storm and the thing collapsed and it went by the wayside, and it is not functionally water dependent, therefore can't be rebuilt in place.
That's
So,
what-
those boat houses you talked about that.
Yeah.
There's an existing house on it. If it's removed by more than 50% for any reason, then come back. I mean, if they wanna rebuild it entirely, tear the whole thing down. If they rebuild it.
And they got a lot that has land. Yeah, going back,
All right, as long as,
yeah, greatest practical extent, and
so, okay.
And to take it even further, there's a section, piers, docks, wharfs, and other structures extending below the normal high. It specifically says in there, you cannot build a residential structure on
But it's a residential existing structure,
like a house.
yes,
Okay,
with a boathouse under it.
okay.
They wanna rebuild it, do they have to leave half of it there? Rebuild it in pieces, or can they tear it all down and rebuild it in its entirety?
Yeah, they can't remove more than 50% of the market value. If they do, they get moved back. So if they wanna remove 50% of the market, 49% of the market value and rebuild and deal with that, then that would be their option.
The following year, do the other side.
At that point, you really wouldn't have anything legally in your grasp to deal with it on.
And they can't expand back because they're within 25 feet.
But. Right, they're over the water, so.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's. Wow,
And then one of the reasons for that law was two things. People were converting them to dwelling units,
all the time.
and if we allow that, if they're not considered non-water dependent, you could have a boathouse on every lot of
Absolutely.
the whole way.
Yep, and when I started with the department, it's probably my second year, I remember we went out to a case in Oxford. I don't know if you remember or not, I won't forget it, but they had like a boathouse deal that was kind of raised up on this foundation, and the water level in this pond never really got back underneath the boathouse thing, so they did just that. And they put a floor under it and turned it into a bunkhouse or whatever. And I remember going out to the house with Rich, and yeah, they dragged that thing across the ice and got it out of there. Cause
Another
they,
thing we saw was somebody built a boathouse offshore. Out offshore.
yeah,
Yeah, it says it's not a boathouse, it's offshore. And the judge, in the case people took it, said a boathouse, a duck is a duck, or whatever.
yeah, that slide's coming right up. But yeah, no, you're right on the money, and now, I'll get right to you. There's, part of a working group, we just kind of finished up, LD 626, dealing with, they've labeled them as float homes. And I don't know if you're seeing them in your resources here, but there's a lot of folks out there, that build a camp on a swim float, a giant swim float. And then they push it out in the water and, you know, they live on it in the summer. And they've made national publications. There was one in, a national magazine, and the title of the article was "No Permits, No Taxes Required." And as soon as that came out, I was like, somebody's gonna do something stupid. Somebody's gonna put one of these things out in front of somebody that is important, and it's gonna bite them. That's exactly what happened. Somebody slid one of those bad boys out in Sebago in front of $1 million house. And then all of a sudden, the legislator's phone started ringing, and now there's a working group and all this stuff. And one of the changes that was in 2015, and notes aren't enforceable, but it's at least in there. Under the Piers Docks Wharf section, where it says, you know, you can't have a residential structure on anything that extends over the water. And then there's a note that says, unless it's registered as a boat. with IFNW. So now, we're in the weirdo situation where people are registering boats, well, camps as boats. And I just went out to one this summer. And former representative knows the law, voted on the law that we put in place, and used that loophole. He built himself a 16 by 12, 16 by 14 camp with an attached deck, both on independent floats. Registered it with IFNW, slapped a sticker on that bad boy, and hung a 50-pound thrust electric trolling motor off the side that had no wires and no battery. Even if it had wires and battery, it's a 50-pound thrust trolling motor. The structure weighs 10,000 pounds. So that thing could go all of 0 miles an hour forever and go nowhere. We called him on it. And a week later, IFNW went out and he had, I wish I had that. I may have that video on my desktop. If I do, I'll show you. But he mounted a transom. There's a door going into the side of this thing. He put a transom at the door, so you could no longer walk in the door. Hung a 25 horse gas powered engine, and he had to sit, you know, the front of the thing's this way. He had to sit like this and run the tiller to make it move. And the warden service signed off on it, and it met the criteria of a vessel because it can move in and out of a cove. And so we're more to come on that. I would strongly advise folks to, if people are registering boats and you get wind of something like that, you may want to not just register it because it may not be an actual boat. And trust me, I'm a huge fan of people building their own boats. I helped a buddy of mine build a Rogue River drift boat for his guide business. It's absolutely spectacular. He goes down the Penobscot and Kennebec and, you know, does great things, but it's an actual boat. But I love in Maine that you can build your own boat. And I love that there's actual houseboats, like a legit houseboat with like facilities and water containment, because that's the real issue for me. I mean, do I want these little camp things all over our lakes? No. Because I like to fish and I like to enjoy the resources that we work so hard to protect. But the reality of the situation is many of these folks that have these, there's like 3 different options. Maybe you have a composting toilet. Maybe you have a 5-gallon bucket. Or maybe you have a hole in the floor. That's the only 3 options I can really think of to work. Because, again, people are creatures of what they see. So for a while there was that swamp logger show. And at that point, everybody was gonna go to the Penobscot and Kennebec, and they were gonna start hauling pine logs off the bottom. They were gonna make a mint, because that's what people on that show were doing with cypress. Well, it's Maine, that isn't how it works. Fortunately, there were some laws on submerged lands folks to deal with it. Well, now, you know, there's a swamp people show, when we go out gator hunt and all that stuff. I have a TV problem, I watch way too much TV, because I've seen all the shows. Well, it's down in Louisiana, down in the bayou, they have these everywhere. There's not a lot of upland. So they put camps out in the bayou. The difference is down there, they have companies that go around like Blow Brothers does for porta potties and pumps out the gray water tank and the black water tank. We don't have that. Nobody's pumping any of this stuff out. So where's all that yucky going? And then it just creeps me out that, you know, somebody's at their camp and somebody went to the bathroom or even just washed dishes or whatever, and then their kid just jumps off out into the water and. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so back to boat houses.
Yeah.
So in the situation we are right now in Belgrade, you said to protect your, maintain and protect your boat house. So nothing happens.
Good.
So right now, we're experiencing, very high water. As is everybody else in the state.
Yep.
And, the lakes are freezing.
Mhm.
So, and it's kind of an emergency situation. So what's the things on putting bubblers inside of your,
Oh, bubbles.
inside of your boathouse to protect it from the ice until at least the water gets down to normal
Right, right, no,
water. Is that legal?
shoreline zoning wise, we got nothing on. I don't think anything under the NERPA laws prevents you from doing it. I take an annual fishing trip up to Moosehead. We usually stop right in town at where that dockside place is, and they got bubblers all around their big boat out there. They're-
Todd, they have it around the.
Yeah. So I don't think there's an issue with it. I remember a few years ago, well, I say a few, probably was more than a few, but, where a very similar fall happened. I just remember duck hunting like, 200 yards out in the woods because the water level was so high. And there was a lot of stuff that froze that normally wouldn't have water. So maybe that is a viable option. There's no shoreline zoning rules on it, so you may want to check with like IFNW or, DEP, NERPA folks to make sure they're on board with it, but I can see that as an emergency situation to deal with some of that. I would strongly encourage folks to, get with their dam coordinators and, open up some chutes and let some water out. I understand that's just gonna put the water into the next resource and down to the next, but you gotta pull the drain on the tub to get some of that water out, or, yeah, there's gonna be some damage.
I'm on the chair with them.
There you go, you're it. You couldn't be more it right now.
What do you think? Reasonable to think that that would be a temporary structure under NERPA? And it's just during the winter time?
Yeah, I would absolutely think that. As long as it's in place less than 7 months out of the year, and the bubblers themselves are usually below water. So, it's not gonna be filled. I would think that would work. I mean, I remember, did you ever deal with Rosenberg?
Richard Road?
Yeah, sorry, bringing up bad memories. Yeah, well, he was the first time I'd seen anybody like bubbling up like everything. Like he had bubblers everywhere.
Yeah, in Massachusetts, the Charles River, the yacht club there, they're year-round yacht club. They do keep yachts in their boats year-round, and they have that problem, and they use the bubbles all the time.
Yeah.
That's under the river too,
Yep. It seems like a reasonable option to protect stuff. The only reason I just always tell people to call people is, if anybody gets near that open water and somebody falls in, what's that liability for the person to put the bubble in? And not that I've run into that situation, but I did have a situation that, somebody had a swim float. And it was in Auburn, and they left it in and it froze there. And snowmobilers came across that night. They didn't have any reflectors on it, didn't have anything on it, and, I'm sure they weren't going 20. They were ripping across the lake, and the first two people hit it, and they got really hurt. And, I remember being on that case and thinking, man, this is just awful. And then working with IFNW, they were out there the next week with chainsaws, cutting that thing out of the ice. It wasn't a boating navigational hazard, but, they didn't have it marked, and at that point, it had been in there longer than 7 months, so NERPA had some teeth on it. But that stuff gets super sketchy, with people crashing into stuff, going through the ice and all that stuff. So, like Richard's saying, it looks like a duck, this is kind of what we deal with a lot of times. I don't think the gazebo that was worth 108 grand was white, but that was in a similar situation. Residential structure out on the dock. These are all setback violations that we run into. Ooh. Oh, I can move it with the wheel too. Look at this. That's cool. So we'll kind of hit the fast forward button here. Non-vegetated surfaces, lot coverage, basically anything that doesn't have vegetation growing on it is a non-vegetated surface. The thing that we get a million questions on is impervious. Like everybody's like, oh, it's not impervious. I don't care about impervious. That's stormwater law. Does it have veg on it? Is it green? Does it grow green? If not, it's a non-vegetated surface and gets counted towards your lot coverage. Where has been some changes that have come into play on some of this stuff. The typical non-vegetated surfaces, structures, driveways, parking areas, other areas where vegetation is removed. Some exemptions that came in were for naturally occurring ledge. That existed, I'll be honest with you, there's all kinds of dates and shoreline zoning stuff. You may know why the 1989 one's in there, but how we came up with 3/24/1990, I mean, that's pretty specific. I don't really know what happened on that day. Something did.
Was that a change to guidelines on that day, or is it what?
I don't know. I've never been figured out. And then there's just too many phone calls, so I stopped trying.
I don't know.
Public boat launching facilities are an exemption as well. And something that Rich dealt with for a bit is this grass paver concept, which we'll touch on in a second. This is the naturally occurring ledge situation that we're used to seeing, coast of Maine. People were essentially being penalized for the ledge, like can't do anything else on your property because of all this ledge. So at one point, people were literally coming in for NERPA permits to bring in like 3 feet of fill and trying to like get grass to grow out on this stuff. And then Mother Nature just says, no, and rips all that stuff out and it's gone. So mostly this is a coastal thing. I've run into this one time in Rangeley where there was a glacial erratic boulder that was half the size of this room sitting on this lot. And, you know, it was, you know, the exemption kind of got put into play there because it was a naturally occurring situation. But anyway. The grass paver thing, I think, you know, years ago, it was talked about as maybe this is a good option. This actually is an option that was working. You know, that's got the grass pavers in there. And for a while, there was a credit being given if you use the grass pavers because it was growing green. But the reality of the situation is we live in Maine and this is what they typically look like. I assume it's because of our winters, plowing, compaction, sand, salt, all that stuff just kills it off. So that exemption or that credit went away. The kind of workaround that I've been working with on this, if people are in a situation where their driveway is kind of their last hope to get under the lot coverage thing, I encourage people to go back to what I always thought of as camp roads when I was a kid. Grass on both sides, grass in the middle, 2 tire tracks. You know, that's a viable option for some more seasonal use type of camps. If you're there all winter and you're plowing that stuff, it's probably not gonna hold up that great. But it is a viable option for some people that they've employed and it's worked. But, you know, it may not. So non-vegetated surfaces, it's 20% is the limit in most shoreline zone districts, 70% on coastal waters and rivers, not flowing into great ponds that are in a commercial fisheries maritime district or a general development district. Ooh. So this is, you know, obviously we got some non-vegetated surfaces here. You can just like pick your violation. There's NERPA violations, there's shoreline zoning violations, there's just take a pick. I'm sure those stairs don't look 4 feet wide either, but and that's a darn nice sand beach that brought in with a nice wall up front. But. So kind of what we were talking about before, vegetation is important because obviously that's the thing that filters the water, intercepts the stormwater runoff, slows erosion, slows sedimentation, provides habitat for, fish, fowl, and, others. Privacy conserves natural character of Maine. Number one, it's the thing that keeps the water from going green. Runoff and erosion is a huge contributor to this stuff. It doesn't seem like much, if a little bit of, I call it chocolate milk, you see it all the time, a little bit of chocolate milk gets out into the lake. And, that little incremental thing, maybe that in itself isn't a huge issue, but if that's happening 1,000 times around the lake. And those sediments and silts are out there, and then that phosphorus molecule attaches to it, and algae starts to grow, and then all of a sudden you're cooked. And we've spent, as a state, hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get these lakes that have turned green to not be green anymore. We have put alum in, coated the whole bottom of the lake with alum, hoping to trap it and keep it down. Worked for a little bit, came right back. We put out these different organisms out there, and then these fish to eat those organisms, then it comes back. It's stopping it before it happens is the best defense on this stuff. Trying to stuff that toothpaste back in the tube, not ideal. So shoreline buffer standards, this little picture here is gonna come up again. It's a nice buffer, wooded floor, forest duff, got some ferns, got some trees growing in it. The shoreline buffer stands within 100 feet of great ponds and flowing to great ponds. That's that buffer. 75 feet to streams and wetlands, 75 feet to trib streams. Canopy openings can't be bigger than 250 square feet. You can have a single meandering. Meandering is the key, no straight shots. Create a straight shot that everybody walks down. The water's gonna run down it, and have it, those nice chicanes or whatever. Meander down through. Removing trees and saplings are based on point system. Pruning live branches and trees, it's just the bottom third. I mean, you can open up a pretty good view shed if you're just dealing with the bottom third. And, we get a lot of folks that like to, I call them lollipopping trees. They'll just prune all the way up, so it's just like that, crown on the top, and then it gets windy and it falls over. Imagine that, it wasn't top heavy at all, but it's, or we had a case that extends back a few years where it was probably one of the biggest replanting plans in this town. And I went out to inspect it a few years ago, and they'd done the same thing. They had planted like 1 million trees on the site, and I went out and they're all perfectly round. They literally look like lollipops. They're only like this tall. And the property owner told me, again, I don't know, it's just how they grow. I mean, I love that stuff because I'm kind of a jerk now to say stuff, because that's how they're growing, huh? It's all you probably should have cleaned up all the branches you trimmed off before you sent it. It's like, what? Oh, I don't know what happened. My landscaper must have done it. Okay, yeah, all right, yeah. Good stuff. Try again. So when we're looking at a well-distributed stand of trees, we use a point system. Can get a little cumbersome, but it works. For a 25 by 50 plot, you guys use 25 by 50 here? Or is it 25 by 25? 25 by 50? Yeah, all right, so you get 24 points in that area, each tree, DDH. Taking a measurement of the diameter of the tree, 4.5 feet above ground level. And each diameter tree is worth a certain number of points, and those points are calculated up to come up with what you got. So in this case here, they need to have a certain number of points. They go out and figure out the diameters of all these trees, add everything up, they come up to 35 points, and then you can figure out exactly what can be removed.
What DBH means?
There, rest height.
Diameter, breast height. So it's diameter of a tree, 4.5 feet above ground level.
Mhm.
So there's a bunch of different tools that you can do it. There's these tape measures you wrap around it and all this stuff that work pretty well. I worked with a gentleman, that has $1 million idea, or, you know, 1 million people needed to measure this stuff. But he actually took 2 framing squares and cut a slot in them. And so the squares would go in and out, he would just go up and clamp the tree.
Yeah.
And he actually had the points written on each thing, and he could do a plot in like 5 minutes. It was incredible. He was also the same guy that he'd hurt his back. And I noticed on the back of his snowmobile, he had what looked to be an old basketball hoop, one of those ones that you get as a kid that you can raise up and up and up. And he welded that onto the basket of his snowmobile. I'm like, what's that all about? I said, that holds my auger. So he doesn't have to hold his auger. He just automatically lowers it down the hole and automatically picks it up on a spring-loaded thing. I'm like, dang, dude. And you're wasting your knowledge. You should go on Shark Tank, make some money. So. You probably aren't gonna pick this up, but, so when you're doing your 25 by 50 grid, no more than 50% of your points can be from the big trees. So the 12 inch plus trees. In this slide right here, it's kind of a tricky slide or whatever. You only got 2 trees, 12 inches in the points, but they make up 16 points. You only got 28 points in your grid. So you're gonna need to do this one a little differently, because over half of your points are based on those big trees. And you gotta have succession is the key to all of this. You don't wanna have all giant trees, because then they're all gonna die off at the same time. You're not gonna have any little ones coming up. So this is a, buffer that's been cut according to standards. It's actually probably a little bit heavier than it needs to be. But it's been pruned up, the bottom third of trees. It's left some good veg. The ground cover is completely there. There's a forest duff layer. You can see, all these little saplings and seedlings. You gotta make sure you have 5 of those per plot as well. Is that my computer? So it doesn't shut off. So cleared openings, no cleared openings greater than 250 square feet within the setback. To be honest with you, there could be one oak tree. Like if I cut down the oak tree in my backyard, it's gonna open up on 250 square feet. But as I was getting into the game, I learned from somebody who's been doing it a little bit, you don't always have to be standing up to figure out canopy. There could be low growth that you can't see from this level that may be providing some canopy as well. So don't always think that it's just up here. You gotta get yourself a little shorter and look up through what some of the smaller trees could be. But that's usually the one that fetches people up, is the 250 square foot opening. So within the vegetated buffer, obviously you can have 6 foot wide meandering path and some staircases down to the water. This staircase here that's pictured, we're gonna assume for argument, I believe that it's correct, that this is 4 feet wide as it comes down, even though it's got these like bump outs. They're 4 feet wide. The thing you gotta watch for when you're permitting stuff is that you don't all of a sudden start having sitting areas and all these other things with patios, little decks and all that stuff. So set of stairs to get down there. The other thing with the path to keep in mind, if you're in an RP district, the rule says within an RP district, there's no cutting or removal of vegetation inside 75 feet of the resource. Outside of that 75 feet, there's some stuff that you can cut. So as I've learned, you essentially could probably have that 6 foot wide meandering path down to about 75 feet in RP. But inside there, you're gonna need to go single track because you can't remove any more vegetation. So unless there's a situation that you can kind of weave through the trees, and be in there, but you can't remove any veg to make it happen. One thing I do need to, at some point, we're gonna continue to work on it a little bit more. I've got a lot of calls from vets, from cancer survivors, from other people. They have some sort of disability and they are talking about having some issues accessing their shoreline, for one reason or another. And there's a disability variance within your ordinance and within the state guidelines, within statute, that allows somebody to create something to go over, certain standards within the ordinance to allow for egress into a structure. But it doesn't say anything about getting down to a resource. Now, there are some workarounds here. You can, maybe boardwalk some stuff if it's undulated slope, it's difficult to traverse or something like that. But the thing of trying to get down through a situation like this set of stairs becomes challenging. It's something that it's not a hot topic, but it is something that I considerate of, and I want to make sure that we're looking into because I don't want people to not be able to enjoy the resources of Maine just because there's some sort of disability in play. But currently, I don't have any rules in my toolbox to guide them to get them there. And beyond that, obviously, Rich and I have had a bunch of cases together through the years, but people take advantage of that stuff. We had a case where somebody made a brick road basically down to the water so they could drive a Escalade down to the water so they could, unload a family member that, had some sort of disability. We obviously called them out on it and, you could do the same thing with a golf cart, right? And make it 6 feet wide and meander. You don't need a 24-foot wide brick patio down to the water.
Called a reasonable accommodation.
Yeah, it was reasonable, all right. I'll tell you what wasn't reasonable is when we had that meeting and they brought in this person who was disabled and kind of made a spectacle of the whole situation and try to make you feel bad about what you're doing, when we know that it's an Airbnb and that person never goes there ever. Although you do have one picture of the person in the water, it's just, it's that whole thing of people being honest and forthright, challenging sometimes. So hazard tree stuff, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Structural defect, something is wrong with a tree. Under normal environmental conditions, might it fail? Not hurricanes and tornadoes and microbursts and all the stuff we seem to get a lot more of these days. High probability of failure. Will it fall on something? Will it hurt a person? Will it fall out into a road? Will it damage a piece of property? All of those kind of things. That's when we're dealing with an actual hazard tree. Imminent risk to bank stability is one that kind of came up through the years too, just because the tree that's hanging over the bank, half the roots are showing, and if it topples over, it's gonna take the whole bank out, it's gonna lead to a bunch of erosion. That most likely is gonna be determined as a hazard tree. But again, get an arborist, get somebody out to core the trees, somebody that actually knows something about something to figure this stuff out.
Good question. If the tree does fall
Yeah.
in the water, right?
Yep.
You got 2 weeks to have that removed, and then it becomes habitat or something like that?
I've never heard that 2-week window.
Yeah.
I've talked to IF&W about this before. Every time they've talked to me about it, they said, it just can't be there long enough for it to turn into habitat. So like, say the thing fell and you didn't deal with it for 2 years. Yeah, now, on a lake out here, that's gonna turn into habitat, bass and, whatever fish are all over that. But let's say, what happens a lot of times is, say these past storms, the one right before Christmas where everything was coming down all over the place. There's no way people are able to get that stuff out of there before stuff started to freeze. So you're never gonna make that 2-week window. But could you deal with it next spring and get it out of there? Sure. But there's no,
So there is no time frame.
not in shoreline zoning rules. Maybe we talk to IF&W to figure out how they perceive that but
And even then, they'll leave it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, as long as there's been a reasonable attempt to get it out of there. Yeah, I mean, if you let it sit there for over a year, I think they're probably gonna be like, I don't think so. At that point, you've made a mistake.
If you cut it down, you have to take it.
That's right, yeah, you dump it, you gotta haul it.
Including on the ice.
Including on the ice, and that's something that we've, through the years, have actually suggested. You've got stuff that, you're worried about as a hazard tree's gonna fall on your dock, gonna tear up the bank, gonna do any of that stuff. But you don't know how to deal with it during the summer. Right, just let the lake freeze, dump it on the ice. Then, if you let it, let's say there's a normal winter, I don't have those anymore, but, you could literally dump it on the ice in February. Roll your truck over there, hook onto the thing, drag it back over the boat landing, load it up on a trailer. Buck it up and get it out of there. Which is a technique that I've advised people to do for a while, because, I don't want you dumping it into the lake. It's gonna be way more problematic. And, a lot of people don't wanna pay $2,500, three grand a tree, and have somebody climb it and take it down in little pieces and do all that stuff. Unless you're my father-in-law, you just wait forever and the stuff just starts falling all over the place and like, hey, it all fell down. I don't know. So hazard trees, if they come down, if you cut them down, and you create a cleared opening, you gotta have some new tree growth present or plant some trees, at least 4 feet in height. And, well, see that, never understood that. You gotta plant some trees. You're not gonna get 2 inches DVH, get the tree's 4 feet tall, because you're measuring. But the biggest thing for tree removal is you can't pull the stump. Now, you bring a stump grinder and grind it down to ground level, so you don't have all these tripping hazards and stuff, but you cannot bring an excavator out and dig the thing up.
With these blowovers we just had,
Yeah,
cut off the trunk, the ball doesn't flop back down, it stays up. And we just cut off what's in the ground and all it out.
I have suggested to people, they try to flip it over first. Like hook onto it, see if you can flip it back. If it doesn't go back, you're gonna have to pull it in some respect.
We got a lot of rocks. Let's pull the rock up, the roots.
Oh, yeah.
Just not.
Yeah, no. I mean, then you're gonna have to deal with it that way, just to try to deal with it in a way that doesn't involve an excavator going down through there, because then it's gonna be, I gotta remove these other 8 trees to even get to that one. Imagine that, I got a big view out of the dip. So if it's outside the buffer, there's probably gonna be tree growth that's coming back up. If not, you're planting with some native trees.
So when you said you had a hazard tree, does that mean if you have an arborist come in and they say, oh, this is failing tree, it's not just because if it falls, it's gonna hit something? That doesn't make it a hazard tree.
Right, it has to have,
Your previous slide confused me just a tad. Oh, maybe not, no.
Dead disease dying and things.
oh, I think I skipped over one.
You did.
One more. Right, so it's gonna have some sort of structural defect that an arborist is gonna pull out. Yeah.
We live
And,
in an area where trees fall, they're just total destruction.
yeah,
So I was misled by where it is, that's fine.
So, again, after these storms, some trees gotta lean to them, and you can see on the ground where they're pimpling up. Hazard.
it's probably gonna be a hazard. And I am super conservative in terms of not telling something is a hazard, meaning if I even get an inkling that it might fall on something and somebody has said that that's a hazard, I'm going with it. Because I do not want to be associated with a situation that I have advised the CEO to say, no, you got a whole pad on that. It doesn't look like a hazard. And then 3 weeks later, somebody's house is crushed. Right, somebody gets hurt, kid gets hurt, anything. I just don't want to be associated with that.
Part of a definition of a hazard tree would also be, if you're looking at the base of it, you'll see it all the size of the base of it. Well, that thing's full of ants.
Right. Yeah,
That's a hazard tree.
it very well could be. Or if somebody does what I've seen numerous people do, they bring out handfuls of sawdust and put them around the base of trees and say,
You can see,
that's it.
you can see the holes.
Sometimes, yeah.
If you look.
When armor, cut down, plant palm trees.
Right, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? And, you know, I dealt with a violation down in Wiscasset where. God, they tried every mechanism to kill so many trees on their property. I've never seen anything like, to be honest with you. They had a house up for sale and they, number one, they started just cutting down trees. And they're, started dropping them. And they ended up in the water. Well, it's tidal water. It's Wiscasset, so there's lobstermen down there. And the tree started floating away and started getting into lobster buoys and that's a mistake. Lobstermen ain't taking well to have their traps being swallowed up. And so that's when the complaint call came. Then we went down and investigated it. They had started drilling 1-inch holes and packing them with rock salt, drilling 1-inch holes, filling them with Roundup. And in others, they started like plugging the trees and I don't know where they even got them. They got giant copper spikes. They started driving them into the trees to kill them off. And the town actually, they're quite inventive, we'll say. They entered a consent agreement with the people. And it was a big financial penalty. They had to replant. I mean, they probably had 30 grand in replanting. And they had a $75,000 penalty, financial penalty. They deferred 50 grand, so they had to pay 25 up front. And then if they sold the property to anybody that wasn't a family member within the first 5 years, they had to pay another 50 grand. And then inside 10 years, it was 25, and inside 15, it was like 10 grand. The problem was they didn't make a herd of them. Cause,
Property is worth a lot more.
oh yeah, that view was worth a lot more, so that $400,000 house with that view, all of a sudden was worth 600 grand, so they sold it for 600 and just chipped off the 50 to the town, and said, yeah. Pleasure doing business with you. Good times, but. It's the first time I've ever seen that level of, you know, destruction, intentional destruction. Up until the most recent case I dealt with in Camden, which was just in the newspaper, I don't know if anybody saw this, where property owner who used to be a governor in a Midwest state hired someone to cross property lines and poison a bunch of trees, and they used a herbicide that is not allowed in Maine. And it killed hundreds of trees and impacted the soils. So the financial penalty was like $400,000. And they were on the hook for all the restoration. They had to dig up 20 feet of soil and replace it. I mean, they probably into it for $1 million. But it was a good look, really, for former governor.
Might get it declared as a super fun site to boot.
Yeah, yeah, they did. There's a lot of digging, and I'm pretty sure the property owner that was impacted was Miss Gorman, the LL Bean family. So didn't work out so well. But I will say the town was actually not upset with me, but was pretty upset with the state because the Board of Pesticides gave them a financial penalty of, I don't know, it's either $1,500 or $2,500. The town ripped them for like 400 grand, 2,500. Sounds good. Bring in some illegal chemi from wherever. So dead trees, no foliage during the growing season. Removal out if died from natural causes, no creational lawn, no cleared areas, no removal of stump. This kind of gets into the brown tail thing we talked about. If you get a tree that's really infected with brown tail, and it doesn't come back in a couple of years, yeah, it's gonna be dead. My property in West Gardner, I have some oak trees, and like 1 year I noticed like 2 brown tails. I'm like, oh, that's not good. And the next year, like the whole tops of all our trees were dead. But fortunately for us, we had a wet spring the next year, so the fungus or mold that grew on the trees actually killed all the brown tail. And the trees, 95% came back. I still got a little area that I'm suspect of, but it's an oak tree, so
In a case like that, is a requirement to replant if we don't have points there? Or our creates a clear open?
Yeah, yep, yeah, yeah, if you get a cleared opening or you don't have the points, you're gonna have to deal with it in some way, unless, you know. You have a, tree already establishing itself underneath, which. Hopefully in a more buffer area, that's the case, but if it's your lone tree out in the middle of your lawn, yeah, you probably put some back. So storm damaged trees, this is what we are in. At this point, damage beyond the point of recovery as a result of storm event, uprooted, blown down, lying on the ground, or still standing, those are all storm damaged trees. Nope. There we go. So within the buffer, if you've got storm damaged trees and you got limbs that are higher than the bottom third, you can actually trim those limbs so they don't start poking holes and stuff when they fall off. You're gonna replace trees that, create a cleared opening or you don't have the points. Hopefully by natural regeneration, some saplings or seedlings that are down bottom, or you're gonna put one tree per 80 square feet. The key is you can't typically remove the stump, your situation there, that's, may come into play. The big thing is you can't create new lawn or other cleared areas. Outside the buffer, kind of the similar deal, but typically outside of that area, you're dealing with some natural regeneration or you're planting on a one-to-one basis. We are almost done, I swear. It's kind of what we were talking about before, disability variances, so, CEOs can issue a disability variance, permit, can issue a permit and disability variance to make a house accessible. That variance is coming into play because you're probably, or over lot coverage, or maybe it's an expansion of footprint, you don't have any room. That's why it's a variance, because you're exceeding some sort of standard, but be reminded, when you're dealing with those, you still need to send that stuff into the department. That way we have a record of it and then we'll deal with it accordingly.
These variations are only for accessibility.
Only for accessibility into a building. Yeah,
For the life of the disabled person.
right. That is something that you can put as a condition. You don't necessarily have to,
I thought that was.
but it is an option that, you can require that it be removed after that person is no longer using the
Statute
property.
said when the need is no longer required, then it revert it back.
I have to reread it. I'm thinking. I don't know if it says exactly that, but I'll check it. And back to one of the original conversations. DEP issues a permit under the Natural Resource Protection Act. Can municipality approve the project on that basis? Heck, no. Please don't. They're not reviewing stuff for shoreline zoning. They're not. We're getting better, but they are not. So you do what you need to do on your end to make sure it's compliant with your regulations. It doesn't matter if the DEP approves something or not. Doesn't play a role at all.
So this is the PBRs.
It's a PBR, it could be an individual permit. A PBR is, I refer to it as kind of the online dating of permitting, a picture and a paragraph gets it done. Whereas a full permit, an individual NERPA permit is one that comes in with engineered plans and a lot more criteria and a lot more standards associated with it. So it could be a PBR, it could be an individual permit. And to be honest with you, I should add to this slide, it could be the stormwater law, it could be site location of development. It could be any DEP permit that is being issued. If it's not compliant with the local regulations, the more restrictive rule applies. And if your rules are more restrictive, that's what you hold them to. So. Here's all our contact information. I'm gonna be honest with you, if you need to get a hold of somebody, email them. I get 50 phone calls a day, at least. 100 phone calls a day the last 3 days. And if you get trapped on my voicemail, I apologize up front, because there's no way possible that I'm gonna be able to get back to you in a very timely manner. Because as soon as I listen to the voicemails, 5 other people are calling while I'm listening to the voicemails, leaving more voicemails. And it's just this never ending cycle. And now, actually, when you call me, I stole it from somebody else. It actually says, if you're getting this message, please don't leave me a voicemail. Here's my email address. If you have the capability to do so, please email me. If you can, I understand it. We'll get back to you, but I just don't want people to get trapped on my voicemail. And it could be an easy email of, hey, can you give me a call? I could probably give you a call within 2 hours. But if you get trapped in that voicemail, you're there. It's not ideal. But this is kind of what we do, so I talk to my kids about it all the time, you know, what I do for work, why it's important, but reality, this is what I do so I can go do what I want to do. I mean, it's a cash grab situation. The work's important, but I'm gonna be honest with you, if I can get a job riding roller coasters 24 hours a day, I'm out. You know, you'll see me on Steel Vengeance, just ripping it until I throw up. But, you know, these are Jeff Kalinich down in the Portland office. A way younger me with way less gray hair and probably a lot more hair under that Spurs hat. And our newest employee, Jess. So. The thing I always say at the end of this stuff, is this, I appreciate you inviting me out to talk and listen to me run my mouth for a couple hours. But the reality of the situation is, I thank you, because none of this matters without you. I get calls every year from all over the United States asking why shoreline zoning is so effective in protecting water quality and doing right by the state of Maine. That's why people come here, right? You don't come to vacation land if it's gross. Why are we effective in doing it? My response is always the same. It has absolutely nothing to do with me, the DEP, or anybody that works at the DEP. It has all to do with you. Because I don't administer and enforce your laws. I don't go out and meet people on site and tell them, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. That was my job with NERC. Actually, that was a little bit easier, I'll be honest with you. Cause I could go out and say, hey, you just dumped a dump truck load of sand, you got 2 weeks to get that crap out of here. If not, you're gonna pay involuntary donation to the state of Maine of $5,000. You know, it's a lot easier for me to get stuff done that way. But the reality of the situation, the only reason shoreline zoning works is because of what you all do, because you're willing to come here and give up a couple hours of your night when you could be sitting at home watching a Bruins game or doing anything other than listen to some guy from the state talk about shoreline zone. And people are always kind of taken aback by that. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Why are you giving credit away like that? Because that's where the credit is due. It literally, I mean, yes, we answer the phones, we work with the legislators, we help with the laws, we help do whatever we can. But there's 465 towns in Maine. There's 3 of us. 3 people, shoreline zone. We don't do jack in comparison. You're on the front line, you have boots on the ground, you're actually doing the work. So I commend you for the good work that you do. Because without you, we would be all of those places that all of these people are moving from to come here. And that's another thing to hold on to. Why, you know, when people come in and start getting all pushy with what do they want to do and whether they want to meet greatest practical extent or whether they want to meet this law or that, like, well, where'd you come from? Why are you trying to make it look like that? Like, why are you trying to, if you came here to get away from that, stop trying to make it look like that. Because the same thing's gonna happen here, and we don't want that. No, then we're not vacation land, then we're just another state with some gross stuff and some good stuff. But I truly appreciate everything that all of you do, because in most cases, planning boards are not typically paid. Maybe you get a little something, but you know, it's not a career. You know, you're all volunteers. You're trying to do the best you can to protect the things that you all value and the rest of us value as well. And that's super important to me. And it just doesn't happen without all of you. And as nice as it is to, you know, have people thank you for the work that you do or whatever. It's just not us. It's just not, you know, we're just happen to be the people that you call when there's a problem, or we're definitely the people call when binocular people are watching the neighbor rake the leaves and they call in a complaint because Buddy's out raking the leaves, and you get out there and realize that Buddy was just raking his leaves, and you know, you're just wasting everybody's time. But I really appreciate what you guys do, and you know, it simply doesn't happen without you. So if there's anything I can ever do to help support your efforts, let me know. You need me to come back next week to talk again, let me know. I would rather spend my time doing this stuff to make your lives as easy as possible. Because they're thankless jobs, you know, that's the reality of it, you know, especially I commend you folks that live in town that are participate in these planning boards or CEOs or town management or anything, because like I said at the beginning, there ain't a chance that I'm getting on the board in my town, because, well, maybe after I retire, I would do that. And then, you know, deal with it that way, but it's difficult. And like I said, it's very thankless, but from me to all of you, I thank you very, very much, because it's super important, and hopefully someday we'll have more staff that is covering more parts of the state and we're more available for folks, and you won't get trapped on people's voicemail. But as it sits right now, there's 3 of us, and I'll leave you with this little aside. When we were in the Ray building that's being remodeled, I used to sit where Rich sat, and it was down at the end, and there was a little window, and right outside the window, there's like 4 or 5 little weirdo trees. I don't know what kind of trees they were, crab apples or something. And I'm sitting there one day, and it's not going that well. Somebody's giving me a bunch of grief about whatever, we're not helping, we suck, all that stuff that you hear on a daily basis. I pay your salary, like, yeah, somehow pay myself. That's great, and they tax me just the same. And I look out the window, and there's 4 guys from Building General Services outside trimming a tree. And at that point, I'd had enough. So I walked down to the Bureau Director's office and like, hey, I need you to come down here. He's looking at me and like, wow, like, guys, come down. I gotta show you something. He's down, I'm like, yeah, look out the window. He's like, yeah, what am I looking at? Like, you see those 4 guys out there? He's like, yeah. Like, you got 4 guys out there trimming 1 tree. You're like, yeah. I was like, we got 3 people protecting the rest. Like, that makes no sense to me. You know, it's the economic inequity here is incredible. Of all the trees that are around all the lakes and rivers and wetlands in the state, you got 3 of us. And you got 4 dudes out there just ripping on a crabapple tree like their life depends on it. So, but again, I say a lot of weird things, I say a lot of weird stories, but it's just because I see a lot of weird stuff.
I think Mr. Clark deserves a round of applause.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Clark, I don't have a problem for you, but I really appreciate that you accept our invitation.
Yeah, anytime.
And in gratitude of that, we have water and we have some oven rice. So everybody's can help themselves to it.
Perfect, thank you.
So I don't know if there are more questions, but as questions are flowing around, you guys can go and get some water and get some food as well.
Perfect.
One question.
Yeah.
Sort of like, you know, the question that probably you anticipated, but, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not what planning boards do, it's what the compliance rate is. Right? I mean, we can write permits till we're blue in the face. We can write the best permits in the world, but if people don't comply with them, they don't matter. The work's a fiction. Do you have any sense of what the compliance rate is with shoreline zoning statewide? I mean, here in Belgrade, I don't know, Hans might know because we now have a tracking system, or at least last I knew we had a tracking system. But, you know, our prior code enforcement officer had no clue. but estimated that it was only 50% compliance. And that didn't seem unreasonable or reasonable, but do you have any sense what it is statewide?
I couldn't put a number on it, but what I can say is communities like yours that have people come out and do these kind of talks, your compliance rate is better than the towns that don't. Been doing this since 2013, end of 2012, going into 2013. There's towns in my central Maine area that I've never heard from ever. I am sure the compliance rate there is not good. I'm sure they're not even issuing permits. There's communities around the state that are still working on a 1992 ordinance. So,
I mean, I have no doubt that because of Pond's efforts, our
Yeah.
compliance rate is better now than it was.
yeah.
When
I would agree.
I mean, Belgrade had a long tradition of not enforcing its ordinance.
Yeah, yeah.
For decades. And so I'm sure it's better, but 50% doesn't cut it.
Right.
Voters didn't approve these ordinances to have a 50% compliance.
I
rate.
agree. I agree. And, I think the only way you can really ramp up compliance on that. And it's difficult. Something we used to do with the PBRs back in the days is we'd have a conservation. So, you're used to conservation aids coming into the DEPs, like college kid, entry level job, summer job. And we used to pick a different PBR section. So let's say this year we were doing stream crossings. And we'd have the conservation aid go out and we'd pull a report of every PBR that was issued for a stream crossing. And they'd go out and look at all of them that summer and determine a compliance rate and determine how things went forward. That's kind of how coastal wharfs got out of PBR. It's how coastal riprap got out of PBR, because it was, once you went out and did that compliance work, and it showed that, 50% of the coastal riprap jobs were crap. Okay, we can't do that under PBR anymore. We need to do it a different way. So I would say, if you as a community here want to try to increase compliance on some of these standards. Not that I want to spend the town's money, because I know Hans is doing a good job. But again, Hans is one person, and when you get tied up with some of the cases that I know.
It's actually a half a person.
Oh, he's a half a person, looking pretty good for half. But
Medfield has the other half.
If you could bring in that like college kid as like a summer intern to go out and say, you pick a project, say expansion, and go out and just have them start pulling tapes. Like, oh, they said they were gonna do a 15 by 20 expansion. They go out and the thing's 17 by 23. Okay, then you're gonna learn a little bit more about your compliance rate, and then ultimately, you're gonna find violations. And then ultimately, you gotta deal with them. But that's the only mechanism that I've been able to advise people to try to increase that compliance rate. The other thing is too, is when you do find someone that's out of compliance, and hey, I'm not all about walking around with a big stick and whacking people. But if you find somebody that's out of compliance and they're not willing to play ball to come into compliance, you take them to task. You go all the way. Removal, consent agreement, the whole thing. Like, don't let them pay the fine and keep what they got. Have them tear the damn thing down. And then the next person is gonna be a little bit less likely to spend 50 grand for an expansion that's not legal, knowing they may have to tear that bad boy down.
So we'll tell other people who see it, they'll know that they can't do.
That's right. Yep. And another good thing that you can use, and I have been a little poor on it just because we've been such short staff for so long. If you get a good compliance case that results in, some sort of enforcement work that the town is especially proud of, write up a little Reader's Digest version of it, send it to them. I'll put that thing right in the newsletter. So not only does your town know about it, all the other 2,200 people that receive our newsletter also know about it. So it's kind of showing CEOs out there in other towns that, hey, Belgrade's doing compliance. Why aren't we doing compliance? You know, especially when, you know, you got CEOs that are in multiple towns. I mean, it's kind of the norm these days, you know, you got. To be honest, I don't know how you guys do that, you know, where you like here and there and. This town's updated to 2015, this one's still in 2006, and how's that all work? And, you know, but showing people that you're actually holding people accountable is the best mechanism for compliance. And again, I come from the background, I started with the DEP and air. You know, I wanted to get to voluntary compliance, you know, I'm not looking to, you know, hammer people. But, you know, there's been so many times where you show up on site and screw you, I pay your salary, blah, blah, I know this person, I know right then, you know, that we're going, you know, I'll go all the way with you, I don't care. My favorite one is, don't you know who I am? I got no clue, but when you sign that consent agreement, I'll know exactly who you are. Or the other classic one was like, you know, I'll have your job, these keys come off immediately. It's all yours. You got it. That way you can come out and deal with people like you. And people are like, oh, what? Like, yeah. And then the classic one, you know, telling me everybody that they know. Great, that's great. I've heard of them too, you know. Who do you know? It's so awesome. But, yeah, compliance is tough. Hopefully it's more than 50%.
To our online people, I'm gonna say goodnight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Make it smart.
Yes, my,
Good to meet you.
and we go.
How's it going up there in Oakland? Oh, great.